Welcome, dear traveler of the night. Set your worries down like a light pack at the edge of camp and step with me onto the slow sand. Tonight, we wander into the quiet brilliance of the desert, where shade is an art, water is a scripture, and wind writes its careful lessons across the dunes. This is a soft journey, no rushing, no sharp turns, just the gentle unfolding of Bedouin wisdom. Practiced for centuries under a ceiling of stars. As you listen, let the harshness you might expect from the desert soften. Think instead of breath, tents that breathe with the breeze, dates shared in the hush of evening, a kettle murmuring on a low ember, elders whispering knowledge that feels both tender and exact. The desert has a reputation for severity, and that is not false, but its deeper truth is rhythm, patient rhythms that turn scarcity into skill and distance into understanding. Here, shade is shaped like a promise. Water is kept like a secret. The wind is listened to like an elder that if you find balm in long, quiet history such as this, you are always welcome here. And if you'd like to walk with us again through other silent places, snow villages under Aurora, libraries forgotten by time, markets that still whisper at dawn, consider subscribing. Your presence helps us keep the fire small and steady, the kettle warm, and the story slow enough to carry you into sleep. Now, pull the night gently around your shoulders. The sands are waiting. The desert does not begin with a horizon. It begins with a sound. Step closer and you will hear it, not immediately, not all at once, but as a patient layering, a sift, a hush, a faint brushing like distant fabric being folded. Sand moves the way thought moves when we allow it room, unhurried, quiet, and persistent. Each grain is smaller than a word, yet together they speak with authority. The Bedouin have listened to this voice for so long that it has become the background pulse of life, a kind of metronome set by the planet itself. Listen a little longer. There is a low note when the wind presses across the gentle slope of a dune, and a lighter note when it slips over the crest. In the steep lee, where sand avalanches grain by grain, the sound drops away to near silence, as if the dune is taking a breath. Stand at the base and the sound changes again. Now you hear the tiny impacts of sand striking your clothing, a soft tick-tick-tick that feels almost like rain in reverse. On rare days, when the sand is dry and the slope just right, the dune can sing, an otherworldly hum that begins like a held note and grows into something that seems alive. Travelers long ago gave these voices names, but the Bedouins simply call them what they are, the desert speaking in its many registers. The wind is the composer of this symphony, but the sun is its conductor. At dawn the air is cool and polite, brushing the skin like a careful hand. Shadows are long enough to offer comfort even to small creatures. A beetle, a fox, a child helping to tether a shy young camel. By noon, the sun asserts its rule and all sounds shrink. The world tightens into small, slow acts, tying a line, setting a kettle, adjusting the flap of a tent to breathe without inviting glare. Then, in late afternoon, the air relaxes again. The sounds return, a distant bleat, the soft exhale of a camel's nostrils, the almost inaudible push of sandals pressing a path up the windward slope. In this daily music, the Bedouin do not fight the tempo. They learn it. A dune scene from far away looks simple, almost like a single brushstroke. Up close, it is a book of fine print. Wind leaves ripples as neat as careful penmanship, each line tracing a brief treaty between breeze and gravity. Bedouin feet learn to read these signs, ripples that point where the wind has come from, fresh edges that reveal a recent gust, smooth patches that hint at a hollow beneath. These are not abstract observations. They are decisions, where to cross, where to rest, where a child's legs will not tire too quickly, and where the tense cords will grip. In a world where the map redraws itself each day, reading the text of sand is both literacy and survival. The desert's quiet is not emptiness. It is clarity. To an untrained ear, silence. To a practiced listener, information. When wind strengthens, it speaks through a tense lines, humming a tone that tells the angle of strain. When a kettle's lid rattles, it is not simply water boiling. It is the signal that tea, strong and sweet, is near, and that conversation will soon move at the same comforting pace. When a camel shifts its weight with a soft grunt, the sound is not only animal. It is a small question. Are we lingering or moving on? Bedouin life is filled with these acoustic threads. That is why nights, even the quietest ones, feel full rather than empty. Walk with me a little way up the dune. The sand gives underfoot, and your steps sound like the slow rub of a hand across suede. Each footfall writes a brief sentence that the wind will soon erase. In this vanishing script, there is a kind of mercy. The day does not demand to be remembered in sharp detail. It asks only to be lived precisely and kindly. At the crest, pause. The view rolls away in folds, each curve catching light differently. Far off, a line of tents is almost invisible, their forms woven into the land as if the dunes themselves had decided to sit down for the evening. Smoke rises thin as thread from a cook fire, stitching the ground to the sky. The Bedouin have many words for the subtleties of wind and sand. And though those words differ from tribe to tribe, the habits behind them rhyme. Shade is set not just where it is dark, but where the wind can still pass through, carrying heat away like a careful porter. A tent is angled not only to greet the breeze but to refuse the sand's harsher moods. The cloth itself, dyed and woven in patterns older than most maps, does more than decorate. It filters light, softening the noon glare into something gentle enough to think in. Inside, voices drop in volume without losing warmth. Children nap. Tools rest. A loom waits. A water skin keeps time in small. Cold beats. To live here is to know the difference between stillness and stagnation. Stillness is how rest is earned. Stagnation is how trouble blooms. So the day alternates in simple measures. Activity early. Walk, check the lines, share the last of the cool morning water, move a pen to pen if needed, repair a strap. Then the wide quiet of midday. Stories, soft chores inside the tent shade, the small gossip of families, the clink of cups. Later, the evening, the long matching of footsteps to camel stride. The small miracle of finding a patch of earth firm enough to hold a peg. The quiet satisfaction of setting a cookpot so the flame can sit without wasting itself. In such rhythm, the desert ceases to be a void and becomes a companion, demanding, frank, but fair that if you listen closely, you'll hear that the silence of night is layered too. Crickets rasp somewhere near the fringe of camp. A faint breeze scours the dune face, releasing a whisper that slips around the tent like a secret. Overhead, the sky ticks with starlight, old light arriving from old stories. Elders, when they speak, keep time with those lights, measuring memories not by years but by journeys taken, wells found, storms ridden out. The youngest lean in, careful in their questions, and learn to hear lessons that are never quite said aloud, to mend before you must, to set shade for others, to drink small and often, to thank the wind when it brings relief and forgive it when it does not. There are dangers here, of course. A sandstorm can rise with little warning, and the world can narrow to the space within your veil, the breath inside your scarf. But even then, there is a method. Lines are tightened. Mouths are covered. Eyes close, half-lidded to protect without panicking. Children are kept between adults like precious cargo. Inside a tent, the storm becomes sound before it becomes fear. A long, dense drum roll, a bass woven from 1,000 tiny drums. When it passes, the desert is remade. The camp reappears under new outlines. The familiar dune wears a different hat. The path away is now the path home. And life continues, as it always has, with no drama in the telling. Only the next small task, carefully done, morning returns with its own quiet. Cold at first, then kind. A kettle wakes. The first cup of tea fits the hand like a found stone. Warm, smooth, steadying. Someone steps out to read the dunes, not as a ritual but as breakfast for the mind. Where did the wind work hardest? Where did it spare us? Is there a new shoulder of sand that will shade the animals at midday? The answers are not announced. They are folded into decisions. Movement is a conversation between land and habit, and the Bedouins speak it fluently. If you are very still, you can hear your own breath joining the deserts. In, like the wind up the slope. Out, like the sand releasing from the crest. The Bedouin learned this long ago. Matching breath to land makes even a hard day feel kinder. And so, under a sun that can be severe, life finds a softness, a child's laugh from behind a tent flap, the sound of a date being split and offered, the small applause of a palm frond touched by breeze at an oasis. The desert's secret is not hidden at all. It is in the patience with which people listen to it. Whispers become lessons. Lessons become customs. Customs become the quiet strength that holds a community together. Even when the horizon looks endless and the distances want to intimidate. Be why the time night returns. The day sounds have settled into a memory that feels almost like sleep itself. Sand whispering, rope singing, tea murmuring, a camel shifting, a hand smoothing a rug, a story trailing off with a promise to finish it tomorrow. The desert's voice, steady now, says what it always says to those who are careful: be simple, be precise, be kind, and you will endure. From a distance, Bedouin tents look like low constellations gently resting on the earth, dark strokes stitched across the pale sand, each line held to the ground by cords that gleam faintly, like threads of starlight lowered to anchor the night. Up close, you see how deliberate this quiet presence really is. There is no accident in the way a tent faces the wind, no guesswork in the rhythm of its ropes. The tent is both shelter and instrument. It plays the air and light the way a practiced musician plays a familiar song, by ear, by hand, with memory guiding every adjustment. The cloth, often woven from the hair of black goats, is a language in itself. In the morning, when air is dry and the sun's angle is kind, the fabric is tight, its weave holding firm against the bite of the breeze. As daylight deepens and humidity rises, the fibers relax, opening just enough to let more air pass through. In this quiet breathing, tightening and loosening without a single command, the tent moderates the day. Shade is not a blunt block. It is a living gradient, a soft filter that dilutes glare into workable light. The famed black tent is therefore not merely dark. It is intelligent, adapting with the day the way a pupil adapts to brightness. Step beneath the canopy and the sun becomes gentle, as if it has removed its shoes before entering. Underfoot, woven mats and rugs create layers. Storytelling under the palms, work at the loom, rest by the cooking hearth, a corner for mending or for small hands to learn knots. Many mornings begin with a quiet rehearsal of maintenance, a quick pass along the lines to check for strain, a glance at each peg's bite in the sand, a test of the ridgepole's mood. If the wind has shifted in the night, the whole tent may be turned a few degrees, not dramatically, but with the same restrained care you'd use to angle a lamp for better reading. In this world, a few degrees matter. A small change in angle can lift a heavy day. Consider the edges, the valances, flaps, and modest drapes that can be lifted or lowered like eyelids. They frame the day and parcel its heat. Lowered in noon's blaze, they extend the shade like a protective thought. Raised in the evening, they invite the blue air to flow, carrying away the day's ache. The geometry of the tent is simple enough to sketch in the sand, a rectangle stretched on low poles. The long sides tethered by lines that sing when wind plucks them, but the lived geometry is subtler, where shadows pool, where embers can glow without choking, where the goatskins of water can hang in the path of cooler drafts so that a small miracle of evaporation keeps the drinkable world a few degrees kinder. Tea is an old and beautiful economy. Poles are not plentiful, so each one earns its keep. Ropes are not wasted. They form a modest harp the wind knows by heart. Stakes find a balance between grip and mercy. They must hold, but they must also release without tantrum when it is time to fold the tent and move on. Every object has a double life. A cloth that shades by day can wrap a sleeping child by night. The line that anchors a corner can also lead a camel. A length of woven wool can be a divider for privacy when guests arrive, then a blanket on a sudden chill. This doubleness, this readiness, keeps the camp nimble and the mind unburdened. The tent is also a theatre of conversation. Guests are received where light is most flattering and air most forgiving. Tea arrives in 3 acts, strong to wake the tongue, sweeter to loosen stories, sweetest to seal the visit with warmth. Voices drift in careful currents, never forced to fight the heat. Stories are told sideways and gently, as if letting the mind find its own shade. The cloth holds the murmurs like a friendly cave, but not so tightly that laughter overheats the moment. In the thickest weeks of summer, even words are chosen for their coolness: short, calm, precise. The tent teaches this: conserve what you can, spend what you must, and make each expense beautiful. Children learn the tent not as an object but as a verb. They learn how to lift and settle cloth so that sand shakes loose without entering the living space. They learn the difference between a knot for a quiet day and a knot for a fickle night. They learn to read the wind from the sound of the ridge, to hear in the mingled tones of chords and fabric whether a change is needed. These are not ceremonies. They are habits, learned through 1,000 small acts that accumulate into fluency. And when the time comes to move, a camp that looked fixed to the land suddenly becomes feather-light. Poles descend. Lines coil. Pegs rise from the earth with a satisfying reluctance. The tent folds into itself like a night sky at dawn. There's a practicality to the black goat hair that a modern architect might call performance. It sheds rain, but when wet it swells, closing the tiny pores that once let air pass, so water stays out. When dry again, the pores open, and the tent resumes its breathing. Heat gathers near the peak, but never so much that it scalds. It is coaxed away by the same cross breezes that carry voices toward the tea table. Embers glow low, never starved of oxygen. Even smoke, so often a nuisance, is taught to behave, rising in a column that threads through a carefully opened seam. Nothing is wasted, not the shade of a palm frond leaning across a flap, not the memory of how the wind behaved last season, not the small lesson carried by a day's mistake. At night, the tent's darkness becomes a canvas for the sky's music. Through seams and lifted valances, stars appear in measured patches, and the inside of the tent feels like an observatory built to study stillness. The Milky Way slides in silence. A faint breeze translates starlight into touch, a cool thread across the face, a whisper across a wrist. The night does not rush towards sleep. It settles into it, settling the camp along with it. Even then, the tent listens. A line's faint thrum suggests more tension ahead of dawn. A far-off hush says sand is migrating somewhere beyond the crest. In the morning, decisions will be made on the back of those whispers. This is the portable house that actually speaks to its owners. To call these tents primitive would be to misunderstand what refined really means. Refinement here is not polish for its own sake. It is the arranging of materials until they answer to land and weather without complaint. It is the humility to let climate be an ally. It is the beauty of efficiency disguised as ease. In cities, we must by stillness, by coolness, by the hush we forgot to design. Here, under cloth that breathes, hush arrives as part of the plan. The tent is not just a shelter from the world. It is a way to be in the world that does not fight the planet's habits. That if you look again from that distance, the tent's low. Like commas in the long sentence of dunes, you might think of the camp as punctuation that makes the landscape readable. Without it, the sand is beautiful but relentless. With it, the day is divided into clauses gentle enough to live inside. In the morning, a clause of work. At noon, a long pause of shade. In the evening, a clause for moving or for welcoming friends. And when it is time to go, the sentence continues without tearing. The tents lift, the stars reclaim their threads, and the sand smooths itself into new grammar. Moving stars, indeed, brought down to earth, then graciously return to the sky. Shade in the desert is not simply the absence of sun. It is a craft, a choreography of cloth and wind, of angles remembered and gestures repeated until they become muscle memory. The Bedouin treats shade the way a calligrapher treats space around ink, negative but vital, a shape that carries meaning. Under a high, unblinking sky, the difference between harshness and hospitality is measured in the width of a shadow, the lift of a flap, the choice of a pole set half a hand higher or lower. What looks effortless is a mosaic of decisions. Where to cast the first rectangle of cool, where to let wind pass like a quiet guest, where to hang water skins so that every small motion of air persuades them to surrender a little heat. Begin with the light. Morning light arrives gentle, grazing the ground at a forgiving angle. It is the hour when cloth can be opened wide without punishment, when the tent front breathes large, and a family's day steps out of its own shadow gradually. As the sun climbs, the work grows subtler. Edges descend. Slits narrow. Small triangles of shade are spliced together with surprising precision, moving with the sun like a slow dance. You can watch an experienced hand adjust the world by a finger's breadth, tug a line, shift a mat, slide a pot, until the glare becomes a pale partner rather than a tyrant. Shade is not only brightness managed, it is heat sculpted. The black goat hair that seemed merely dark now reveals its deeper intelligence. Its threads are not heavy so much as purposeful, swallowing light where needed, yet woven loose enough to exhale. Air crosses the tent in two streams, one low, sliding along the floor like a cool creek, one higher, rising toward the cloth and pulling warmth with it. The Bedouin have no need to name this in the language of physics. Their understanding is tactile. They can feel when air is lazy and must be coaxed, when a flap must be lifted not straight up but at a slant, so that breeze enters as an invitation rather than a shove. Where there are palms, the craft adopts new tools. Palm fronds are porous shade, a dapple that tricks the eye into feeling cooler by letting the mind see motion. Under their pattern, the body relaxes differently than it does under a solid ceiling. Light flickers like water and convinces the skin it is being bathed. A mat thrown between two trunks is not just a seat but a temperature decision. Its fibers lift the body from hot ground, and in that thin air gap, comfort is invented. A bowl of dates sits in the half-light, softened by shadow, sweetened by cool. Children learn to choose the patch where shadow and breeze agree, and the elders smile when they find it quickly, as if a secret had been guessed on the first try. Shade has etiquette. Guests are given the seat with the best current of air, the view that soothes, a cup that gathers condensation, if such luxury exists that day, on its clay. The host's shade becomes more generous by how quietly it is arranged. A cloth is retied with a gesture so practiced it looks like thought. The brazier is pulled back just enough that its heat does not bully conversation. Smoke is taught to stand where it will be beautiful and brief. Stories slow in the shadows. They do not need to hurry. Each pause is a cool place to rest the mind that I and the camp's work. Shade parcels the day into smaller, kinder units. The loom is placed where hands can memorize patterns without squinting. Dyes are mixed where colors can be judged truly. The cobbler stitches are counted in a pool of even light. The water skin becomes the camp's small miracle when it hangs where shade and breeze are strongest. Evaporation turns the goatskin into a humble engine that knocks the temperature down by a precious degree or two. At midday, when the heat tries to turn time into stone, shade keeps the hours malleable. It creates a corridor through which useful tasks can still travel without scorching. Travelers speak often of mirages, but Bedouin shade is the opposite, something real that suggests the miraculous. A low wall of woven reed can tilt a day toward mercy. The shadow beneath a camel is carefully added to the family's ledger of cool places. A child will sit there with a book of lessons or a small game scratched in the dust, and the animal seems to know it is helping simply by being. Even the tools are made to collaborate. A wooden spoon casts its slim line. A water ladle hangs where its shadow announces the hour, and the handle is turned just so. So it remains touchable when needed. When the heat is a sentence, shade is its punctuation. A comma of shadow under a tent edge suggests a pause to breathe and sip. A semicolon thrown by a taller pole divides a long task into two bearable parts. A period, full shade, full stop, declares rest. The Bedouin grammar of light is not academic. It is humane. It keeps tempers calm, foods wholesome, hands steady. A pot kept in shade needs less watching. Bread under cloth rises at a pace that makes a meal agree with conversation. Even animals respond to this grammar, arranging themselves where instinct and human kindness overlap. Goats curl where their coats are most protected from glare. A dog sleeps where two streams of air intersect. The art also extends to movement. On the march, a caravan becomes a weaving of shade in motion. Long bodies cast long shapes that migrants of dusk step through in turns, each person drafting behind the next, as if walking in cool footsteps. Guides choose routes that sip shadow from dunes' north faces, linking pockets of relief the way a river links pools. There is a quiet exhilaration in this, outsmarting the day gently, not in defiance but in partnership. To an outsider, it looks like luck. To those who have learned, it is a map drawn in light and wind die in the evening. The desert gives shade back with interest. The sky itself becomes a vast canopy of cobalt and lavender. The first stars thread coolness into the air. The tent expands again, its edges lifted to let night pour through. Lamps are lit where their glow will make faces kind but not bright. You can see how the day's care accumulates in the way people settle. No sharp movements, no hurried speech, only the soft inventory of tasks done and those pushed to tomorrow. This is not laziness. It is wisdom that knows the work of the next day begins with how kindly you end this one, that if thunderstorms wander the margins of summer, shade becomes shelter of a different kind. The cloth that breathed now thickens against rain. The same wave that invited breeze now politely refuses water. Children are taught to hear the change. The tent's voice lowers, its drumbeat deepens, the flap's edges speak in a wetter tongue. Heat breaks, and laughter comes easily, the sort of laughter that arrives with relief and leaves the air even cooler. Afterwards, the tent dries like a lung taking its first full breath again, and the art resumes. Lift, angle, tie, listen. There are, of course, days when even perfect shade feels thin. On those days, the art is to edit life. Work shrinks to essentials. Words shrink to essentials. A good host offers silence as hospitality. A good guest accepts it as gratitude. You notice how the world gathers itself under small gestures. A date split and shared, a cloth moistened and laid across a wrist, the quiet scrape of a cup being refilled before it is empty. The shade seems to deepen with each kindness. As if the tent itself feels thanked, modern buildings sometimes chase the desert's lessons with glass and machines. Yet the principles remain old and stubborn. Orient to wind, weave for breath. Harvest small temperatures, share coolness. The Bedouin never needed to publish these. Every camp writes them anew each morning in the way its edges meet the day. And when camps fold and families move, the wisdom travels light, like a shadow that refuses to be left behind. By night's arrival, the art of shade has done more than keep bodies safe. It has kept tempers gentle and attention available for what matters. Stories, song, the brief ceremony of tea, the gossip of stars. In the dark, the tent is a lantern of privacy, drawing a soft line between the family and the wide, good world. Beyond that line, dunes rest in their own shadows. Within it, faces glow with a calm that is not tiredness but completion. The day is forgiven for its heat. The air is forgiven for its dryness. And the shade, faithful and unshowy, is thanked with the simplest blessing. Tomorrow, do as you did today. There is a certain kind of quiet that only exists near water in the desert, a hush made of relief and reverence, as if the air itself chooses softer syllables. Long before a well is seen, it is felt, in a cooler thread of breeze, in the sudden appearance of birds that seem to be writing punctuation across the sky, in the green insistence of a palm's crown standing like a lantern above the dunes. Bedouin travelers learn to read these omens the way a physician reads a pulse. Each sign a hint that life is gathered somewhere beneath the sand. Folded into the earth's careful fist. To call wells hidden is not to say they are secreted away on purpose. Rather, the desert hides everything by default. Sand erases clues with the persistence of tide, and light flattens distance until every hollow looks like every hill. Yet the land whispers instructions. A line of tamarisk reveals a seam of moisture, their roots threading downward where rain once paused. The shape of a wadi, dry riverbed, remembers storms even in the drought of years, pointing toward the places where water chooses to linger. A lone acacia, thorny and spare, keeps watch near a shallow table of rock, and beneath that stone a coolness waits that no sun can bully. The best wells of names that are spoken like blessings. They come with genealogies and stories. A great-grandmother who first noticed a swale of greener grass after a rare rain. A caravan that lost a day to a windstorm and found, by accident, a depression with damp sand. A shepherd who followed the humming of bees to a hollow where roots drank deep and left the faintest sheen on the soil. In time, those hints become a hand-dug shaft, ringed with stone or clay, patient as a clock. A well is not just a hole. It is a treaty with depth. It must be kept clean, covered, honored with restraint. It remembers generosity, and it remembers abuse approach slowly. Even the animals are taught this courtesy. Camels, wise in ways that no one brags about, bend their long necks to drink in careful mouthfuls, pausing, as if to ensure they do not take the water faster than it can be offered. Goats jostle more, but a soft word sorts them into order, and a child's firm hand guides the bucket swing into a rhythm that pleases both thirst and patience. The first taste is not a gulp but a test, cool, mineral, sometimes faintly sweet, sometimes brassy with iron. The body receives it like news from a friend who has been gone too long. Around wells, culture condenses. A circle of stones becomes a bench, and a bench becomes a place for exchanging maps of memory. This path gentler after the last wind. That ridge friendlier to hooves. A rumour of a spring 2 days south that may or may not be telling the truth. Songs slow to accommodate the splashing of a rope and the creak of a pulley. Stories drift toward water the way people do, each one taking its turn at the lip before passing back into the shade. Children learn not only how to draw from the well, but how to listen while others do. Silence is a cup one holds steady so that nothing spills. Oases are wells magnified into gardens. And they carry their own etiquette. Palms stand in ranks like quiet teachers, making shade that teaches crops to grow. Dates hang in dusty clusters, ripening in tears, a calendar that feeds both hunger and celebration. Beneath them, humbler plants, melons, herbs, barley, borrow coolness from the canopy. Water moves as if it were a thought, a narrow channel guided here, a small gate opened there, its surface mirrored by dragonflies that patrol like careful stewards. To visitors, an oasis seems miraculous. To those who tend it, the miracle is discipline, the refusal to hurry, the refusal to waste, the refusal to imagine that abundance can ever be careless here. The Bedouin way with wells is a school in stewardship. Lids are secured against drifting sand. Buckets are rinsed before lowering. A length of cloth over the opening filters dust in high winds. If wood is scarce, a tripod of spare poles is shared among families, its rope inspected as if it were a vein. When the water rises cloudy after a storm, no one curses. The desert has shaken its memory and must be allowed to settle. If a stranger arrives, parched and hesitant, the rules are simple. Water first, questions later. Hospitality begins where thirst ends. Not all water is drawn with buckets. There are tricks older than cities. A goatskin filled at dawn and hung in steady shade with a good draft across it becomes a simple machine. Evaporation cools the contents as reliably as any clever device. Clay jars do the same, beating with gratitude in the noon heat. In the cool minutes before sunrise, a cloth spread wide may gather dew enough to dampen lips, and though that is not a meal, it is a message. This place is not empty. It only requires fluency. Even the wind, unwelcome at times, can be coaxed into cooling. Air moving along a damp surface is persuaded into kindness. A lesson some modern architects relearn slowly, expensively, and with far more glass dot of course. There are dry years when even the faithful wells falter, and then the maps widen. Memory becomes a compass, and elders carry the camp forward with a tone that is tender but exact. This way, not that. Rest here, not there. Wait for night to cross that plain. In such seasons, the etiquette around water grows even gentler. Cups are filled shorter, sips smaller. Tea is brewed with an attention that turns the act into thanks. Laughter does not vanish, but it becomes quieter, as if sound itself should conserve moisture. The desert, for all its severity, rewards this mood. It is not a land that yields to insistence, but it listens to patience that if a well must be dug anew, the work is ceremonial without being grand. The first spade is turned with hope and humility. The shape of the shaft is not a guess. It follows traces the land has already suggested. Walls aligned with what the earth allows. Stone where stone is near, clay where clay will hold, would only if the journey to bring it makes sense. And when water comes, first as dampness, then as a darkening, then as a gleam, the camp does not shout. A murmur passes. Alhamdulillah. Hands dark with soil become hands bright with water. A child is lifted to peer at the miracle, and the child peers, and then someone remembers to set a lid. The poetry of wells enters language and prayer. Lovers are compared to water after a long march. Wisdom is praised as a deep source that does not go brackish under pressure. Even quarrels are cooled by the metaphor, let us let the sand settle, and in that pause, respect returns like clarity to a stirred jar. Around water, the community remembers itself, not a collection of individuals braving a void, but a circle of care oriented toward a depth that sustains them all. Night gathers differently near a well. The air feels heavier with gratitude. The rope makes a softer sound as it sways. The pulley clicks like a cricket trying out a new rhythm, and the stars look more like coins tossed into a dark bowl than they do anywhere else. Sleep here is profound. You can sense why travelers sometimes dream of rain in places where rain seldom comes, because water trains the mind to recognize the steady kindness hidden beneath the day's difficulties. Morning returns and the first draw returns with it. A proof, a promise, a beginning. The day will be possible. In lands where the horizon is a long, unblinking eyelid, water is not a convenience. It is a covenant. Every cup is a ceremony, every drop a decision. The Bedouin know this not as a lesson learned once, but as a rhythm repeated every day of a long life. Gather, guard, share, give thanks. To call water treasure in the desert is not poetic exaggeration. It is a precise accounting. Treasure is what changes the shape of a day. Treasure is what turns a march into a homecoming. Treasure is what is carried carefully even when the back is already tired. In this sense, a goatskin full of cool water is a vault, a promise wrapped in leather. Begin with the vessel. The mashk, a skin bag darkened by sun and memory, hangs where air is most willing to help. It is not beautiful for decoration's sake. It is beautiful because it works. The slow breath of goat hide, the delicate shine of dampness where evaporation is busy, the softness of its sides as water is drawn, all of this is function turned into grace. Tilt it, and the sound is low and generous. Water thickens its voice when it leaves shade and enters a cup. Children learn to pour not as a game but as a right. They are taught that a good pour wastes nothing, that the arc should be short, the patience long, and that guests receive first, then elders, then those who labored hardest under the sun. Water has a hierarchy of uses that keeps the community steady. Drinking is sacred. No argument touches it. Tea follows. Tea not as luxury but as medicine for spirit and conversation. Washing is small but practiced. Hands, face, a quick dab to the nape of the neck, where coolness seems to spread like a rumor of rain. Cooking counts carefully. Lentils swell in modest water with a confidence that comes from centuries of partnership. Laundry waits for rare abundance or is done in increments so tiny that the word laundry would seem dramatic, more like a kindness done to cloth. One square at a time, in the shadow of a bowl. When there is a little extra, water becomes even more of a teacher. A shallow trench dampened around the tent tamps the dust, turning the air from powdery to polite. A thin stream coaxed across a pot's outer wall persuades the inside to cool. A slab of stone, wetted and leaned where the wind can lick it dry, becomes a homemade breath for the camp. No one writes these as recipes. They are inherited notations in the margins of life, sung quietly in the way tasks are arranged. If a modern engineer were to list them, they would read like elegant equations. Here, they read like courtesy. Scarcity sharpens taste. In cities, a glass of water is often thought of as blank, a clear nothing that carries other flavors. In the desert, water speaks. The tongue hears limestone where the well runs through old seabeds, iron where the earth has rusted gently, a faint sweetness where palms have lifted the water's mood. The first sip after a long walk does not race to the throat. It pauses at the lips, as if to confirm that the body remembers gratitude. Elders say a blessing with the first swallow, not because someone taught them to be pious, but because a mouth that has known thirst becomes honest about gifts. Hospitality bends around water like a tent shaped by wind. If a stranger arrives, there is no debate. Water is offered before questions are asked, before names are exchanged, before anyone measures the stranger's story against their own. The cup itself becomes a kind of welcome. Sometimes it is metal, cool to the touch even when the world is hot. Sometimes clay, with its miraculous sweating that chills the rim. Sometimes simply the curved hand of a host, scooping from a clean bowl, a gesture so intimate that it feels like kinship made visible. In that moment, the camp's wealth is not tallied in coins but in the way the stranger's eyes soften. The etiquette of water is also the etiquette of speech. Words slow when water is poured. A pause is offered, like shade, between one sentence and the next. A host watches the angle of a guest's wrist, the way they return the cup, not to judge, but to learn what is needed. Conversation after the second cup becomes more open, after the third more affectionate. Tea arrives to set the talk on friendly tracks, but even then, water is present in the small rinses, the cooling of spoons, the modest dampening of a cloth that keeps the teapot from scorching its resting spot. In this, you see how a liquid can be the grammar of a gathering. Not all treasure is kept in a bag. Some is stored in the discipline of the day. Travel begins early when the air is kind. Steps are matched to breath. Thirst is managed not by denial but by timing. A small sip taken often sustains better than a large gulp taken once. The body is a dune, shaped slowly by steady wind, not an empty bowl to be filled and forgotten. Routes are chosen with water in mind, shadowed faces of dunes, paths that skirt old floodplains, ways that cross oases at hours when they are least crowded. A guide who knows where water lives is wealth itself. Songs remember their names more faithfully than any ledger. There is also the art of carrying. A camel wears water the way it wears patience, quietly and with no need to boast. Its gait keeps a skin sway gentle so that nothing sloshes wastefully. A rider learns the trick of creating a shade pocket under cloth, a cool hollow in the heat, so the vessel arrives as generous as it departed. When walking, the mashk is shifted from shoulder to shoulder at measured intervals, the strap padded where it bites, the pace adjusted not to the clock but to the size of the body. These are small sciences, trial and tenderness forged into method. When the season is merciful, water becomes ceremonious. Dates are rinsed in a trickle, their dust released like the last of a long worry. A bowl is filled deep enough to invite the reflection of a sky that has finally softened its glare. And children are allowed to play with shapes in that small mirror, learning the geometry of light in a language their hands invent. The recitation of gratitude grows longer on such days. Songs include verses about springs that have stayed faithful, about storms that arrived at needful hours, about wells that remember their diggers the way families remember their elders when the season is lean. Water becomes stern but not cruel, and the camp learns to answer with kindness. The measure line on the inside of the pot is obeyed without complaint. Spices are chosen not to thirst the mouth but to soften simple food. Bread is baked thinner so it cooks quickly and yields more to taste with less to swallow. Even arguments grow efficient. A thoughtful silence can settle a quarrel better than raised voices, and the water that would have been boiled for double tea remains in the bag for morning. Restraint becomes not a shackle but a shared philosophy. Keep each other well, and the land will keep you longer. Stories store water too. A child hears the tale of an ancestor who walked a day and a night on half a skin to bring a cup to a sick friend, and in that story learns both the weight and the lightness of duty. Another hears of a year when the sky forgot, and how the tribe remembered for it, digging, rationing, singing, surviving. These are not melodramas. They are instructions disguised as lullabies, poured into young ears at the hour when minds drink most deeply. In the morning, those same children will help refill the goatskin, their small hands steadying the mouth while the bucket empties. The circle closes. Gift received, gift tendered, gift given again. Night makes the treasure glow more obviously. The mashk hangs in the doorway like a guardian. The air cools enough that the world regains 3 dimensions. Tea turns from survival into pleasure. The stars look like scattered beads that might be threaded into a necklace and dipped in a bowl just to watch the reflection swim. Sleep approaches with a softness amplified by hydration. The body sighs into rest the way the desert sighs after rare rain. You can almost hear the sand itself listening for that sound, the sound of a people who have matched their thirst to a landscape's patience. Morning arrives and the first act is water. A cup for prayer, a sip for the voice that will greet the animals, a measured pour for the kettle that will speak to the camp. In the thin light, the treasure is accounted and found sufficient. The day stretches ahead, long but not impossible, and it is water that writes the day's preface, steady, careful, grateful. The Bedouin have a way of thanking without flourish, a simple word, a simple nod at the goatskin, at the well, at the sky. In that small gesture, you see the whole economy of the desert. To treasure rightly is to live well. To share treasure is to belong. To waste treasure is to fall out of conversation with the land. If water draws the map of survival in the desert, wind reads it aloud. To outsiders, wind is merely weather, an inconvenience, a sting in the eyes. To the Bedouin, it is a mentor with many dialects, each gust a syllable, each steady current a sentence that can be understood, trusted, and, when necessary, bargained with. Long before a caravan decides which rib of dunes to follow, someone listens. A hand lifts to feel direction. Cloth speaks against its own seams. Guylines hum in 3 notes, and from those notes a choice is made. Wait, move, or turn a few careful degrees and let the world become easier. Wind's first lesson is orientation. Stand still and it draws a compass across the skin. The face cools, the nape tingles, a knee-length flap of cloth taps out north or south with a private metronome. Children are taught this as play. Turn until your cheek is kind, but the play is a syllabus. Soon they can tell the difference between a breeze that skims the dune's shoulder and one that climbs to pry at its crest. A crest-prying wind means new ripples by morning, sand that will spill into the lee like flour. A shoulder-skimming wind means long, smooth backs to walk, firm underfoot where distance can be eaten gently. Wind's second lesson is timing. Early light often brings a modest steadiness, the kind that cleans yesterday's footprints without scolding. Midday, the air may laze or lash. Both moods have their uses. A lazy noon breeze is good for mending and story, for tilting the tent flap into an islet of shade that blinks slow and cool. A lashing noon breeze is good for drying a repaired mashk, for clearing smoke, for carrying a simple whistle from the goat pens to the tent where tea must begin. By late afternoon, the wind often remembers to be generous again, and the camp adjusts in gratitude. Valances rise, ropes are eased. Cooking fire is coaxed smaller so its breath does not fight the air that is trying to help. You can hear the wind's opinions in cloth. Black goat hair sings when strained, a low vowel that deepens with gusts. Rope answers in a higher register. Between them a chord forms, and the experienced ear can tell when one note is false, when a peg is loosening, when a line has chafed, when a stitch in the ridge has asked quietly for a stronger sister. At night, lying with eyes closed, a Bedouin hears these things and rises without hurry to make them right. The fix is small, half a knot, a shifted stake, a doubled loop, but morning will be better because of it. In this way, wind is both critic and collaborator. Travel seeks the wind shoulder. On long days, a caravan is angled so the air accompanies rather than opposes. This looks like luck to those who do not listen. To those who do, it is choreography. Camels lean minutely into the draft, making their own shade with their own bodies for those who walk beside them. The line of travelers becomes not a straight thread but a very gentle braid, each moving into and out of another's cool slipstream, a courtesy practiced without speech. Guides choose the north faces of dunes when sun is cruel, the leeward flanks when sand is loose, old floodplains when the wind has already done the labor of tamping a path. The best route is the kindest to breath, not the shortest for feet. There is warning in wind too, and the Bedouin receive it with respect, not fear. The air tastes chalky soft when a fast storm is taking the lid off an ancient lake bed. Lips grit sooner than they should, and eyes squint before brightness demands it. On such days, scarves are redded earlier, tent edges are checked twice, and talk becomes practical. A true haboob, wall of sand, announces itself like a procession, a brown horizon suddenly with height, a running animal sound without the animal, then the day turning smaller and nearer. In that shrinkage, procedure blooms. Lines are lowered, poles braced, mouths and noses covered, children held between adults. Inside the cloth, wind becomes a drum. And then it passes, as all processions do, leaving a rearranged camp, new ridges where old hollows were. Fresh smoothness where yesterday's stories were written in tracks. Wind answers thirst even when water cannot. Air over damp clay is cooler. Air through a palm grove is gentler. Air under a tent raised just so is transformed from insult into ally. The goatskin mash cooled by a draught is a tiny miracle repeated daily, and its success becomes a habit of mind. Coax, do not command. Align, do not resist. Modern machines can bludgeon air into obedience, but a tent that breathes is elegance, physics rendered as hospitality. A line tied 2 fists lower, a flap angled a finger's width to the left, and the night becomes sleep rather than endurance. Stories capture wind with gratitude. An elder may describe a crossing when the wind walked with the tribe for 3 days, lifting heat off backs and making the horizon honest. Another tells of a year when the wind was fickle, and how patience became the camp's extra water skin, sipped from often, emptied never. Songs speak of lovers standing on opposite sides of a dune, their words carried over the crest in pieces that fit together perfectly at the ears. Children chase these notions, learning that to shout is to waste wind. Better to speak steady and let the air do the carrying. Navigation by wind is old as hoof and foot. Even when stars hide, the air gives hints. Sand ripples a line with recent gusts. The drift along a shrub's windward side points like an arrow smudged by a great thumb. Smoke from a low ember writes a thin line that can be measured against memory. Yesterday it leaned like this, today more so. Somewhere beyond the ridge there is a pressure the dune cannot yet name. The best guides are not sorcerers. They are archivists of sensation, librarians of texture and tone. Their shelves are filled with moments like, this sound of the guy line means the angle is right for the pass we plan, or this dryness on the tongue comes before the crosswind near the salt flats. Wind affects manners. On biting days, greetings are shorter, cups offered sooner, decisions made with an economy that feels like elegance rather than haste. On benevolent days, conversation lengthens, strings are slackened just enough to hum in a friendly key, rugs are shaken farther from camp so dust returns to its own business without offense. Even animals have wind etiquette. Camels turn their long faces to the draught, nostrils narrowed, eyes half-hooded. Goats tuck into the lee of a cart as if it were a hill. Dogs curl so their ribs lie with the airflow, learning sleep from the weather. There is philosophy in this. Wind reminds a person that power is often invisible, that force is best met with alignment, that arrogance against the sky is comedy. The tent that tries to defy a gale tears. The tent that bows, holds. The tribe that insists on a noon march in a headwind arrives angry. The tribe that waits an hour arrives whole. Even quarrels take instruction. Heated words cool in a crossbreeze if speakers scoot a little, so their sentences arrive with fewer sparks. In this way, weather writes ethics. The land teaches that dignity is not rigidity but poise. When dusk leans in, the wind often falls into a hush that feels earned. The tense notes soften from hum to whisper. Tea steam rises straight for a few minutes, the world's simplest flag of calm, before night's microcurrents begin their own small politics. Voices relax. Someone steps out beyond the lamps to test the air with a raised palm, confirming what the ear already suspected. Traveling at first light will be kind. Then there is the almost silence that has become this series' refrain, a camel's sleepy throat sound. A cup placed softly on woven mat, the sigh a body makes when it realizes it is not being fought by its own climate, while sleep builds. Wind continues its quiet work on the dunes. What was a sharp crest is rounded. What was a hollow becomes a cradle. By morning, maps have shifted by inches, not enough to disorient those who listened last night, but enough to remind everyone that the world prefers verbs to nouns. The desert is not a picture. It is a sentence being written by air. The Bedouin read at each dawn, smile at what they already guessed from the tent song, and write their reply with footprints, poles, ropes, and a kettle set where the breeze will be both servant and guest. At dawn, the desert is a ledger written in soft graphite. Every life that passed in the night has left a note, and the notes are legible until the sun lifts its pen and begins to erase. Bedouin mornings start with this quiet reading. The dunes glow the color of pale bread, and on that warm page are characters both bold and whisper thin, the deep commas of camel knees. the tidy stitches of a fox's trot, the looping cursive of a beetle who changed its mind twice, the haphazard exclamation points of a child's bare feet running toward the first sunlit ridge. Tracks are not merely trivia. They are weather, news, invitation, warning, and memory, all spread open at once. A camel's trail is a language made of patience. Wide pads press circles that hold their shape longer than anything else on the surface, as if the ground appreciates being met by something so considerate. You can tell which camel carried more weight. The circles touch the sand just a shade deeper, edges slightly crisper. A nervous young camel shortens its stride, and the circles crowd closer. An older animal, settled into its role as a moving pillar of the day, leaves a dignified pattern that looks almost ceremonial. Off to the side, you may find a trail of knees where a camel folded to rest before someone rose to tend the fire, a row of parentheses holding a long exhale of night. Goats do not write so carefully. Their tracks are peppery and quick, as if the desert were a conversation they cannot wait to finish. Here their hooves scatter gravel. There they bunch under a thorny shrub that will offer breakfast. Further on, they funnel into a tidy lane at the shepherd's quiet call. A practiced eye sees the story. These three small sets, kids, toyed with a shadow before rejoining. The wider prince, an elder, chose thinner sand because bones remember kindness. Sometimes the goat paths crisscross so madly that they look like a tapestry begun and abandoned. And yet by afternoon the animals are exactly where they ought to be, as if all that scribble were rehearsal for a perfect line. Foxes sign their names with style. A phoenix prints and neat beads on a string, evenly spaced, lightly set, as though the animal floats a whisper above the ground rather than walks on it. Once in a while you see the ghost of a tail tip in the dust, a small brushstroke at the edge of the script. From the distance between steps you can guess whether the night's hunt was purposeful or playful. There is pleasure in this inference, not because it changes what you will do next, but because it ties your morning to someone else's midnight. One world, one page. Two sentences that never meet except in tracks. Beetles are the fussy calligraphers. Their little feet dot the sand so densely that their own bodies sometimes vanish into the patterns. Some drag a line behind them, grooved punctuation, while others pull small balls of dung with a seriousness that would be comic if it were not also admirable. Children delight in these miniature highways. An elder might kneel beside a particularly elegant loop and tease, learning from wonder. See how it turns away from the wind? It knows what we know. It walks beside difficulty without swallowing it. The lesson will be remembered because the track taught it first. Birds write in brief clauses. Here, the tidy V of a lark's landing. There, little commas where feet press twice before a hop. Sometimes a raptor leaves a fan of feather marks, a physical whisper saying it skimmed the dune's crest so close that light had to make room. If fortune is rare and the night was dramatic, you may find the punctuation of a small struggle, footprints clustered, wingtips scored. A spray of dust that says the world was loud for a moment and then quiet again. The Bedouin do not sensationalize these footnotes. They note them, offer a word, bismillah, and let the page turn. Human tracks are honest. The camp's perimeter is edged by many stories that share one plot, the work of keeping each other well. Broad strides to a wind check at dawn are resolved into a measured return. Small prints from a child carrying kindling confide how excitement became responsibility. The distinct heel-to-toe of a guest's unfamiliar sandal announces new company long before voices do. You can tell when a conversation walked while it spoke. The lines weave together, diverge, rejoin. You can see where an argument cooled, the steps that were stiff become rounder, the prints nearer, the direction back toward T. There are the tracks of storms too, no feet, just force. A gust that scoured the tense windward edge leaves a smooth, burnished swale like polished wood. A sudden swirl etches tight spirals around a tuft of grass. Grain slithered down a leaf face in small avalanches and froze into pattern, as though the dune were proud of its new dress. A trained reader translates mood from these textures. Today, a rafted crust under a thin powder, good for long walking. Tomorrow, perhaps ankle-deep velvet that asks for patience and frequent sips. The sand reports the sky's plans before the sky speaks them plainly. Not all tracks are inked by land animals. In the rare aftermath of rain, water writes its cursive across the flats, and when it dries, the script remains, thin ridges that crunch underfoot, a sonnet composed in silt. These are maps of where not to camp and where not to drive the herd. The crust looks strong and is bored by the weight of a hoof. An elder taps such a place with a stick, hears the hollowness, and roots the day around it the way a sentence steps lightly around a difficult word. Reading tracks is not just a skill. It is a tenderness. It turns the morning into a conversation with those who share the land, seen and unseen. A guide who pauses to observe is not delaying. He is greeting the neighborhood. Here, he murmurs, and people gather to see the track of a spiny-tailed lizard, the fine-combed pattern of scales where it rested to absorb the dawn's first warmth. And here, he adds, showing the clean cuts of shoed hooves, the passage of another tribe's camels in the night, then points to where their path veered away to honor grazing boundaries taught by grandfathers. Courtesy is visible, even after those who extended it are 2 dunes away. Sometimes, the page holds a problem, the double moon imprint of a viper's side-to-side slide, elegant and unsettling. The dugout corner of a food cache a fox raided. The long, lonely drag of something heavy, a branch, a canvas sack, pulled by someone who did not wish to wake the camp. Solutions grow from the script. The viper's path is steered around and overwritten by many safe feet. The cache is moved and its new site disguised among similar scribbles. The dragline earns a second pair of hands at the next choosing of chores. The desert leaves trails. The Bedouin ad replies .by midday. The ledger fades. Wind lifts its eraser. Sun flattens what it cannot lift. The morning sentences blur into mood. This is not loss. It is the rhythm that keeps the world from becoming a museum of footprints. Today's clarity yields to afternoon's rest, and in the evening a new chapter will begin as animals, people, and the shy commerce of small creatures cross the sand again. A few prints will endure. Camel pads hold their circular memories until almost night, but even those are invitations, not monuments. Walk here kindly. The ground remembers. I end stories told at dusk. Tracks return as metaphors. A life is praised as straight-footed or light-stepping, a friendship. As close as footprints in damp sand, an error as a wandering goat path corrected before sunset. Children grin at these figures and then look down at their own feet, mindful suddenly of how the day will be recorded and read. The elders do not scold. They trust the page to teach. Tomorrow's dawn will praise what is careful and forgive what is clumsy, and the lesson will continue, line by vanishing line. When the moon rises, silvering the ridges, the freshest tracks shine with a shy shadow, like writing done with a soft metallic ink. The camp quiets. Somewhere a fox begins its tidy script again. Somewhere a beetle starts a poem. Somewhere a camel kneels and places its parentheses in the margin of night. The desert's book is always open. The Bedouin turn the page with their feet and read with their eyes and fingertips. And in that simple literacy they find what this whole series keeps circling toward, that survival and beauty are often the same sentence. Written slowly, walked kindly, and allowed to fade with grace. Movement, in the desert, is not an act but a cadence. To watch a Bedouin camp rise, walk, and rest again is to listen to a long, quiet drumbeat played on canvas, rope, hoof, and breath. The rhythm begins before dawn, when night still holds the shape of tents and the first star has not yet given permission to fade. A kettle is set on embers that never quite went to sleep. Someone tests the wind with a lifted palm. A camel shakes out a low chord in its throat, as if clearing a path in the air for the day's procession. There is no hurry, only sequence, like prayer. One gesture unlocks the next. The morning scale starts soft, lines slackened. Knots coaxed awake, pegs loosened with a patient rocking so the earth is not offended. Children carry coils of rope like generous snakes. Older hands fold the tent's black cloth along creases learned by touch rather than sight. Poles descend with the diplomacy of elders, lean together for counting. There is a tally in the mind and another in the hands, and both must agree. What was a home becomes a bundle. and what was a bundle becomes a balance across a camel's back. The load rides low and wide, never high and proud. Pride breaks rhythm. Breakfast is the quietest measure. Tea and bread speak together in low vowels. Dates answer with a sweetness that makes the morning gentle to the tongue. Voices stay at the level that suits sleeping children and skittish goats. Even laughter is padded. Then the caravan lengthens itself into a sentence. Guide, bell camel, family knots, herds. And the last figures who close the book of camp by smoothing the sand where the fire was. So tomorrow's travellers will read tidiness and feel companioned. Footsteps set the tempo. It is slower than guests expect and steadier than impatience likes. The gait is made to be shared. 3 paces of silence, 1 of quiet talk. 10 breaths through the nose, 1 through parted lips. A sip every so many shadows cast by a staff along the path. When the sun climbs, the line shifts slightly to draft in each other's wake. A mother with a sleeping infant walking in the camel's shade. A boy learning where to place his feet so he does not break the crust. A dog that sketches small loops but always returns to heel when the rhythm tightens to cross a soft patch. Even the goats, who pretend anarchy, begin to move as if they'd practiced. The bell camel is the metronome. Its bell is not loud. It is correct. The note sits in the ear without tiring it, neither bright nor mournful. That sound gives the day a centre line. The caravan may widen, contract, bend around a thorny wadi or an obstinate dune, but the bell marks true. If wind swallows the tone, someone draws closer to sight range until the bell returns. If heat thickens the air, the bell grows sympathetic, hanging longer in the hot space between dunes like a promise that there is a next step and then a next. When, at rest, the bell is briefly stilled by a careful hand, the hush feels like blessing. Roots are written as music is, motifs and variations. There are old paths that always taste of salt after the wind, so the waterskins are shaded earlier, and there are new paths that the land suggests in a season when a shrubline surprises with green. A guide will show a child how to read that phrasing. Today this ridge sings high. We will walk on the harmony below it. The metaphors are not indulgence. They are tools. Song makes memory obedient and turns a geography of sameness into a map of differences. Dunes that would be identical to the careless eyewear nicknames. The sleeping shoulder, the doubleback, the long breath. The names hold rhythm inside them. Rest is chosen before need insists. The wisdom of travellers who refuse debt to the future. At mid-morning, a pause under the lee of a dune loosens legs and flaps. A palm mat out of a stall bag becomes a small stage on which tea rehearses its simple miracle again. Shadows offer themselves. The caravan accepts without pride. Critically, the order of movement resumes without argument after rest. The same bell leads, the same cadence returns. In this, children learn the difference between comfort and collapse. Take what the land offers and keep the beat. The day's chord changes as the sun leans. By afternoon, the light warms from brass to copper. The air loosens its jaw, and voices climb a half-step brighter. A short song might rise behind the bell, a shepherd's tune with 2 notes and a decades-long memory. Stories are told in fragments that fit into the rhythm of walking. No tale is so fragile it cannot survive a pause between breaths. When the caravan must cross an exposed flat, the rhythm tightens. Steps quicken not to rush, but to punctuate, like shorter notes that carry a line through a difficult bar. Then, edge reached, the melody lengthens again, and the shoulders drop. Animals are readers of rhythm too. A camel knows the day's shape by the way a rider shifts weight when the bell sounds a slightly different pattern, by the timing of sips, by how often the line turns into the wind. The herd learns where the evening will find them by the angle of light on the bell's bronze and by the smell of dust rising from feet that are almost done. When a kid goat tires early, its small bleat is answered not by scolding but by the caravan editing itself. A load is shifted. A pace is softened. An older child offers a ride and in doing so is promoted without ceremony. The rhythm expands to hold the weaker beat until it strengthens again. Arrival, when it comes, feels like a cadence the body already knew. The right hollow appears just where it ought to be. The tense footprint is measured with eyes and with a shadow held on the sand for scale. Pegs go down with the calm authority of commas. Lines are drawn and tuned until the cloth hums in the key of evening. Fires are coaxed. Smoke is taught its manners. The kettle remembers the morning and fulfills it. A small cord is strung low to dry cloths. Animals are thanked with brush and water and a word at the ear. That word is part of the music too. It says, "You and I made this day together." Meals occur at the tempo of breath. A stew thickens not because a clock demands it, but because the spoon says now when resistance yields to softness. Bread is flattened with the heel of the hand to the thickness the air will cook. No thinner, no thicker. Spices are added like grace notes, enough to lift, never enough to shout. Cups, plates, and stories circulate in loops that avoid bright light and hot edges. No one hurries talk to finish the food. The eating is how the talking moves, and the talking is how the eating becomes nourishment for more than the body. The nomadic rhythm rests on ethics disguised as habit. Leave a place as if you were loved by it. Pack so that another hand could find what you need in your bag in the dark. Walk so your companion hears their own breath rather than yours. Tie a knot so the person who unties it tomorrow will thank you. Measure water in shared units: a sip, a cup, a kettle, a well's mood. Mark a trail when the land is devious. Blur it when the land is kind and secret. These rules are never shouted. They are hummed with the bell, tightened with the guy line. Poured in the second cup of tea, folded into the tent, when weather interrupts, when the wind insists on its own meter. When a storm inserts a long rest, the rhythm does not break. It modulates. The caravan becomes smaller, nearer, coiled under cloth and shawls. Conversation shortens to hand signals and small looks that have decades of lexicon behind them. Children are taught the lullaby of waiting, counting breaths, telling the story of a star by the pattern of drops on the tent's edge. Sophia learns to sing softer than safety. Then, when the sky returns what it borrowed, the rhythm resumes without fuss, the bell finds its note, and the sand accepts fate as if no interruption had occurred. Night lays a slow, velvet coda on the day. The camp hushes to the sound of ropes easing and embers deciding whether they are finished. The bell is unhitched and set where its silence will be a gift. Someone walks past the animals and counts. Not numbers but presences. This one's breathing is deep. That one's eye is quiet. The pup is tucked under the cart. The old mare flicks an ear at a fly and then forgets the fly exists. The sky writes its notes in frostbright light, the slow, certain measure of constellations, and the camp listens. Each sleeper entering the same music at their own bar. There is a final kindness in the nomadic rhythm. It makes memory easy to carry. The day's beats pack into the mind like folded cloth, orderly, light, ready. If tomorrow's route asks for a different key, rockier ground, a sterner sun, the music adapts without losing itself. In this way, the Bedouin do not conquer distance. They befriend it, teaching their children that survival is not an argument with the land but a duet. You can hear that lesson in the smaller sounds: a peg seated with two soft taps, the bell's last breath before sleep, the whisper of someone telling the coals good night, and in the earliest blue before dawn. When tents are still stars on earth, the rhythm begins again. A hand finds the kettle by memory. A rope offers its first note. The bell clears its voice. Somewhere a child wakes to the smallest clink and smiles. Because even in sleep they have learned what such sounds mean. Another day will be possible. And it will move the way good music moves, steadily, kindly, with room for everyone to breathe. Night in the desert is not the opposite of day. It is the day revealed. When the sun withdraws its fierce grammar, the sky begins to speak in a vocabulary of distances, and the Bedouin, who have always preferred patient languages, listen. The first stars appear like scouts announcing a caravan of light. Then more arrive, then still more, until the heavens feel less like a ceiling than a river. Broad and moving, with currents the eye learns to follow. Under such clarity, a person feels smaller and truer. Salt flats reflect the dimmest pinpricks, dunes take on a quiet edge, and even the low tents seem to nod as if greeting old teachers arriving punctually at dusk. Navigation begins with recognition. Polaris is not dramatic, not the brightest. It is simply faithful. Find the little dipper's tail, or better, let your hand extend to where the sky stays still while the rest turns. The North Star waits there, steady as a heartbeat. To the south, the sky is a flowing tale. To the north, it is a fixed promise. Between these certainties, the caravan draws its lines. East where dawn will rehearse its pale syllables, west where stories go to rest. Elders teach children to begin with big shapes, the herdsman, the hunter, the scorpion, so that the small, precise stars can later be tucked into place like stitches on a well-worn saddle to no one stares hard. The eye is guided to softness. Look slightly beside the star you want and its light grows kind enough to be seen. The desert's recurrent lesson: meet force with gentleness. A guide might raise a staff and draw the constellations so that the youngest minds can anchor an outline to the darkness. Over months, the drawings disappear and the knowledge remains. You don't need the stick anymore. An elder smiles. Testing, and the child, now a little taller, nods, tracing the shape with a fingertip in the air, then quietly finding the direction of home. Stars keep time as surely as they keep place. The Pleiades rise early in cool months like a cluster of guests who arrive before the kettle has found its boil. In hot months, they linger later, unwilling to leave the night's soft company. Orion strides in winter with a confidence that makes old stories lift their heads. In spring he bows toward the horizon, a courteous exit. The Bedouin memorize these entrances and exits without fuss. The herd's breeding, the timing of long crossings, the rhythm of journeys to market, all hum in harmony with the clock above. Even when clouds wander in and hide the faces, the body remembers the tempo. The camp moves in time to a song it can no longer hear. There are practical arts under this abundance. A bowl of water becomes a cheap observatory. Set it where wind is tame and watch how stars tremble on its skin. Their reflection is a second sky, upside down, so that the watcher can rest the neck and still add lines to the mind's map. A polished kettle lid, too, will catch a bright point and hold it long enough for a child to say its name aloud. Names matter. They turn a chaos of lights into companions. That is the camel, one says of a bent line. Those are her calves, says another, pointing at nearby sparks. This is the road. In naming, the sky comes near. Stories do not weigh down the stars. They lift the listeners. A grandmother remembers a crossing when the moon was thin and the wind exacting, and how the tribe kept courage by following a faint arc that seemed to lean toward them. A father recalls the single night he lost the bell camel sound and found it again by aligning the tent flap with a particular star that had always been a family friend. Lovers speak of nights when the Milky Way looked so bright it seemed poured milk, and how they promised, quietly, without witnesses, to be as reliable as the constellations they used to find each other's tents during a celebration. The children, bunked between these histories, fall asleep before the endings, and the endings are rarely hurried if day is heat and distance, night is texture and nearness. The wind lightens its hand. A dog's breath is a small metronome at the tent's entrance. Somewhere a late kettle complains briefly and then settles, consonant with the low purr of coals. The canvas, which during afternoon had a firm voice, now speaks in polite whispers. A lifted edge lets the sky's cool drift across sleeping brows. Faces loosen. Tempers that had grown crisp in noon's glare soften into apology or acceptance by lamplight. Under stars, grievances choose smaller words. Astronomy here is not a museum science. It is a chore as woven into life as milking or mending. Before first sleep, someone steps outside to read the dome. Is there a halo to the moon that hints of thin cloud and a change in weather? Are the usual bright anchors sharp or softened by dust? Is there a meteor shower tonight that will draw children from their blankets like a softly rung bell? These questions are not romantic. They are as practical as checking a knot. And yet, in their practicality, something like worship occurs, not of the sky as an indifferent spectacle, but of the order that lets humans find their way kindly. Sometimes, night is a classroom. A child is woken without scold and led out into the cool to see a rare conjunction. Two planets pretending to be closer than they are. The lesson is murmured, not pronounced. See how they talk without touching. Remember that when you speak across a disagreement. Another night, a dust storm at far distance turns stars into smeared lanterns. An elder marks the direction and subtracts a degree from tomorrow's plan. Add mercy for animals, he adds, and for us. In the morning, no one will remember this as instruction. They will remember it as care. The desert's mirrors multiply the sky. When the moon climbs full, the dunes gleam like patient animals at a watering place, and the path between tents becomes a ribbon you could follow without a lamp. A small child dares to walk alone from one family fire to the next, armed with nothing but a tiny song and the certainty that the night will not betray them. In the raw-boned hours before dawn, when warmth is thin and sleep deepens into its own desert, the Milky Way lowers like a scarf, brilliant enough to cast the faintest shadow. Anyone awake then feels chosen. In that quiet sanctum, prayers seem less like requests and more like acknowledgements. When clouds do come, when the sky forgets to be specific, the Bedouin do not sulk. They remember the other senses. The nose reads dampness. The ear reads distant thunder. The skin reads pressure. The map adjusts. A familiar dune, the long breath, will be different tomorrow. The tent must be pitched a handspan lower. The old track down the wadi needs a new verb. The stars will return when they are ready, and in the meantime, the camp rests on other certainties: the bell's tone, the camel's intuition, the wind's steady argument with cloth. To insist on stars when clouds make other gifts would be ingratitude. Rituals grow around the night's brilliance. Tea served under the open top edge of a tent tastes subtly different. People say this with a shrug because it is obvious. A story told just past the line where lamplight fades and starlight begins carries farther, truer. Listeners lean back on their palms and watch the narrative thread stitch itself to Orion's belt. And the tale's last sentence arrives precisely when a slow-falling meteor burns its perfect, short idea into darkness. A child, keeping count for luck, loses the number and decides that means the luck has expanded beyond arithmetic. Adults do not correct this theology. There is a privacy to stargazing in company. Everyone looks up at the same crown, but each person's mind follows a different path through it. Worries untie themselves. Plans find their right size. A woman whose work all day has been measured and repetitive, knead, weave, mend, lets her thoughts wander the way her hands cannot. A man whose pride pricked him at noon surrenders it quietly, seeing how galaxies do not care for the little scar on his ego. Laughter under such a roof is never loud. It is the kind of laughter that admits we are small and yet exactly the right size. The oldest lesson the stars teach is repeatable comfort. They are there, again, and they will be there, again. A tribe that moves and moves and moves builds its sense of home on such repetition. When a child asks, "Will we be here long?" and the answer is only until dawn, the sky answers the deeper question, "Will we belong?" Yes, wherever the dome is this clear, wherever the road is written above as surely as below. Belonging shifts from the ground to the gaze. This is not abstraction. It is architecture for the heart. Be why the time first light brushes the ridge. The stars have done their work. Some stubborn points refuse to fade for a few breaths longer, and the North Star holds last, dignified to the end, as if making sure the camp has found its bearings for morning. People stir. Someone stamps ash into silence. Someone else returns the kettle to its office. The east blushes. Names of stars recede into the mind's cooler cupboard. Eyes narrow not in strain but in readiness. And yet, for a few minutes, the inside of the tent still feels sprinkled with light, as if the phrase "stars within" were not metaphor but measurement in the ledger of a Bedouin day. The stars are both headline and margin. They tell the tribe where they are, when they are, and, most quietly, who they are, travelers whose journey is not a defiance of the land but a conversation with it, conducted in a script of sand by day and a script of light by night. The dialogue is ancient, and it is kindly. To look up is to be answered. To be answered is to rest. Patience in the desert is not an idea. It is a body with 4 long legs and eyes like wells that have learned to hold a reflection without spilling it. A camel standing in morning light looks like the definition of enough. Enough water carried invisibly in the architecture of blood and belly. Enough calm to ignore the anxieties that make other creatures waste strength. Enough wit to choose the cooler side of a dune without asking permission. Around a camel, the day remembers to breathe. The Bedouin do not romanticize this animal. They respect it with the plain speech reserved for partners. He keeps the horizon honest, an elder says, scratching a chest that rumbles with a sound nearer to thunder than to purr. He makes distance gentle. Start with the feet, broad pads that meet the sand as if greeting an old friend who sometimes behaves badly. Each step spreads, holds, and releases with a softness that seems impossible in so large a creature. In their prints you can read the essay of the day, firm when the ground is kind, deeper and closer when the dune asks for humility. Above those pads, long legs swing like pendulums, setting a tempo that asks the human body to surrender its city habits and sway. Riders learn to let go of their insistence on vertical. To ride a camel is to agree to a sentence with long, slow clauses. The back rises and falls, the world advances in patient arcs, and you, if you are wise, match your breathing to the animal's unrehearsed music. The mouth is an instrument of thrift. Lips split delicately at the center learn to harvest from thorn and twig without injury, to select the tender from the tough, to turn a landscape of almost nothing into a breakfast that will outlast noon. The tongue, armored with modest hardness, participates in the same economy. You hear it in the small sounds of grazing at dawn, dry stalks clicked, a brief satisfied huff, a step, another mouthful. Water, when it comes, is received with ceremony that isn't showy. Gulps are deep, spaced by size. The camel's body keeps counsel with what it is given, shelving moisture like a librarian shelves rare books, carefully, for exact use later. With no gossip about how much is owned, patience shows in the eyes most of all. Set high and wide, they notice distance without being alarmed by it. Sandstorms close them to a practiced slit. Lashes interlace like small fences that weather cannot break. A camel looks at you the way the desert looks at you, without flattery, without contempt, as if waiting to see if you will decide to be sensible. In that gaze Bedouin children read standards they wish to meet: endurance, steadiness, humor that stays kind even when asked to carry weight. He carries your silence, a grandmother will say, meaning the animal will accept even awkward riders and clumsy loads without complaint. So long as you learn the few rules the desert doesn't bend. Those rules are simple. Load low and balanced. A high burden is an insult to the wind and to the animal's back. Tighten straps not with anger but with clarity, checking that nothing will rub to wound after 10 miles. Rest before need demands and always before the youngest animal asks. A tired camel is honest about its limits, but there is no pride in making honesty painful. Speak to the animal as if to a companion, not a tool. A camel will rise more willingly when its name arrives before the tug on the rope. The Bedouin give names that are not cuteness but memory. Dahab, gold, for the one that carried a bride's dowry. Sabah, mourning, for the one that walks cheerful at first light. Hilm, forbearance, for the old matron whose patience taught 2 generations how to tie a proper nose rope. Patience, in the camel, is not passivity. There is theatre when it is needed. He can announce a grievance loudly and with full repertoire. The offended groan, the dramatic kneel, the famous wash of cud-scented breath aimed at the careless. A novice who tightens a girth with a jerk will be corrected by a sideways glance that could prune arrogance from a tree. Yet once respect re-enters the arrangement, calm returns like shade. The animal's forgiveness is large and without performance. Work resumes. The day proceeds on 4 long legs and a stubborn mercy. The bell camel, leader with the soft bronze voice, adds mathematics to patience. Its stride becomes the caravan's metronome. The others key their bodies to that beat, and distance melts into rhythm. The bell does not so much ring as pronounce the horizon in small, reasonable syllables. In weather, a bell camel's patience is the difference between courage and folly. When wind argues, he leans into the angle that makes the argument short. When heat puts knives in the air, he keeps the center of the line quiet by refusing panic. Calves learn where to put their feet by watching the older flanks. They place each small oval print inside the edge of a great circle and discover that the world writes itself under them. Bedouin craft grows around the camel the way shade grows around a tent. Saddles are carved to distribute weight on bone meant to bear it. Padding is mended with a love that is half gratitude, half pride. Halters are braided to be gentle where skin is delicate and firm where muscle asks for a clear suggestion. Water is offered not as bribe but as respect, the timing chosen so that exertion and drink make friends instead of enemies in the gut. When a camel kneels at day's end, the care is immediate and uncomplaining, legs checked for burrs, the soft cleft of the foot brushed free of grit, a murmured word at the ear that is half inventory, half blessing. In story. Camels carry metaphors as easily as they carry loads. A wise person is described as one whose heart travels like a camel, able to go far on little, unhurried by spectacle. A friendship that has endured is praised as two camels in one shade. A quarrel is trivialized kindly as flies in the camel's eye, a nuisance swept away by a patient blink. Children learn from proverbs that endurance is not grimness. It is cheerful exactness, the habit of doing the next right thing without wasting breath on complaint. The camel embodies this lesson with comic timing, snorting at a fly, then forgetting the fly existed 2 steps later. Across distances, the camel edits time. A day that would be hostile on foot becomes plausible in the saddle. The rider's mind is freed to read wind, to name constellations, to remember where a certain wadi holds water after a certain kind of rain. The animal turns survival into attention. In that attention, beauty grows. A hawk balanced on air for the time it takes to recite a prayer. A cluster of desert lilies opening where last week was bare gravel. The way the bell's note changes when the caravan passes between 2 low ridges and the land, suddenly, becomes a corridor. Without the camel's patience, these would be glimpsed and chased as luxuries. With it, they are gathered without hurry as part of the day's rightful pay. There are lean years when even patience must be rationed. Feed is shorter. Miles stretch. The camel shrinks slightly into itself, not with despair but with a craftsman's economy. Step smaller, chew longer, seek the kindest face of each dune. The Bedouin answer in kind. Loads lighten so bones do not speak too loudly by night. Roots shift toward old floodplains that hold the memory of green. Children are taught to greet the bell camel first before racing to stories and sweets. Priorities are permitted to be visible. In such seasons, patience changes from a virtue to an inheritance, handed directly, without sermon. From animal to human and back again when celebration comes, markets, weddings, the annual visit to kin, the camel's patience puts on music. Tassels are combed, bells polished, saddles dressed with color that plays with light as the animal moves. The calm stride turns festive not by becoming faster but by becoming prouder. Songs gather along the line of motion. Poets slip couplets into the day where prose would have sufficed, because sufficiency, for once, is not the only aim. Even then, the animal's eyes remain wells, reflecting without spilling. The patience that got everyone here refuses to be traded for spectacle. After the feast, loads will be balanced again. The horizon will become honest again. The bell will return to its working voice. At night, the camel becomes architecture. A tent rope ties to a saddle. A child sleeps with a back to the warm flank. The moon draws a soft ridge on the animal's neck that looks like a carved line on old stone. The camp's last glance before sleep often lands on that silhouette. It is reassurance. Tomorrow has a body, and it is capable. Tomorrow has a heart, and it is steady. In the early blue, when even the kettles remember silence, a camel's yawn is a cathedral-sized exhale that seems to tune the whole camp. The day takes that note and builds on it. To speak of the camel's patience is finally to speak of a covenant larger than any one species. The desert rewards those who align with its tempo. The Bedouin, learning from their animals, have made a culture that prefers poise to rush, adjustment to insistence, gratitude to complaint. The camel is the moving proof that such preferences are not only moral but practical. On its back, a family can carry shade, water, memory, and hope. At its pace, The land becomes not an adversary but a long, steady conversation partner. And in its eyes, the calm, unreadable, forgiving eyes, you see the desert's answer to so many of our questions. Go kindly, carry lightly, and you will arrive. Threads begin where silence settles, goat hair combed under a low flap of shade, fingers finding their steady grammar before speech does. In a Bedouin camp, weaving is not an activity that interrupts the day. It is the day learning to hold itself together. Yarn is spun from black goat hair and from sheep wool when the year has been generous. Sometimes camel hair is invited into the chorus for strength. Each fiber carries a memory of wind and grazing. When twisted into thread, those memories lengthen into lines that can be read by hand. The loom, a modest frame anchored with pegs and patience, turns these lines into sentences, rugs that teach the floor to be kind, bands that teach ropes to sing in better keys, tent cloth that persuades light to behave. The simplest miracle is the drop spindle, whirling like a small private planet between thumb and forefinger. A good spinner does not watch it with eyes so much as with the listening skin of the palm. Twist gathers in the draft. Wool thins into consistency. A tremor is corrected by instinct. Children begin with clumsy lengths that fuzz and thicken like uncertain thoughts. By the second season, their thread narrows into confidence. The spindle stops rarely. Stories are told across its momentum. News, jokes, instructions. When the wind says from the left, angle the flap so it answers, all of it is braided into the rhythm of the twist. In this way, cloth remembers not only weather but conversation. Dye is where the desert shares its quieter colors. Walnut, madder, pomegranate rind saved from sweet cups, indigo coaxed along like a shy friend. Hues arrive not in neon declarations but in tempered truths. Brick, date flesh, storm shadow, dawn sand. Black goat hair remains the backbone. Color stitches courage through it. Patterns are neither random decoration nor stiff heraldry. They are mnemonics, small libraries of place and prayer. A chevron remembers migrating geese over a winter waddy. A stepped diamond recalls the way a particular ridge lifts twice before falling away into an old floodplain. A border of tight, repeating knots says, restraint holds the center safe. Warp and weft are a marriage arranged by need and refined by beauty. The warp, stretched, patient, vertical, waits with the grace of a good listener. The weft arrives with something to say, passes under, over, and in passing becomes part of the listener's strength. A rug grows the way trust grows, strand by strand until, suddenly, you notice it is strong enough to stand on with bare feet. The first inches are the hardest. The loom argues. It prefers to remain sticks and possibility. Then the hand wins it over with even tension, with a comb's courteous persuasion tapping rows into agreement. Somewhere around the third cup of tea, the fabric admits that it is becoming itself, and from there the day loosens into comfort. The black tent that shades the camp is itself a woven argument for survival. Woven in long strips, then joined with a seam that looks like a quiet river. It breathes when dry and seals when wet. Its pores open to the breeze in noon's severity. They close under rain like eyelids shut against teasing. Ropes, also woven, carry the tent's intentions into the ground. Guy lines plaited from goat hair do more than resist. They converse with wind in tones that announce, to trained ears, what the day expects. A hum of contentment when angles are right. A harpstrum warning when a peg deserves another handspan of attention. The whole architecture is textile and music together. Weaving is also social architecture. Under shade, the loom becomes a table where tasks and tenderness share space. A girl learns from an aunt not because someone ordered a lesson, but because the aunt's hands are interesting to watch. A boy, older now and newly proud of his work with animals, pretends indifference and then asks about a knot he had not noticed before. Why this one here and not that? The answer is not technical so much as moral, because this one holds if the wind argues. That one only holds if the wind agrees. He nods as if filing rope law, and he is, but he is also filing a way to argue without being cruel. Repairs are the highest compliments in the weaving life. An old rug with a new patch tells two stories at once, the endurance of the first hand and the courtesy of the second. patches do not hide. They declare. The color is close but not exact, the pattern honest about its own era. Elders smile at such plural cloth. 2 times are walking together, they say, and children learn that continuity is a greater beauty than perfection. When wind teaches a harsh lesson and a seam yields, the mending is done with the low, affectionate scolding reserved for good friends who misjudge themselves by an inch. Next time, we'll give you 1 more row. The needle seems to say to the failed stitch, portability is part of the craft's genius. The ground loom, pegged at either end, can be lifted and carried forward a day without sulking. The warp rolls like a map. The weft bundles into balls that suggest, absurdly and correctly, that the land itself will finish the pattern, given time. In a moving culture, half-made things are not failures. They are promises. A strip of tent cloth with its last foot yet unjoined rides on a saddle like a patient commandment. Keep weaving. The sun will be kinder tomorrow. There is shade to invent wherever we stop. Patterns talk across tribes. At a farm market, a weaver picks up a band, feels its hand, names its origin before reading the seller's lips. North of the salt flats, she murmurs, because the weft sits tighter, as if remembering the wind there, and the seller blinks, caught, pleased, and lowers the price by enough to say, "We are in the same country, you and I." Sometimes 2 families marry cloth before they marry children. A rug from one camp travels with another for 6 months, and when it returns, its edges are bound in the other family's manner. A border that says, "Your home kept me, and I kept your home." Even the smallest woven piece has a job. Narrow bands become nose ropes that are kind to soft skin and stern to suddenness. Wider bands cradle water skins where breeze can sweeten them. A strip with loops stitched on one side tames utensils inside a tent so that movement does not turn living into a hunt for lost tools. In every case, the aesthetic is the ethic. Beauty arrives as a byproduct of goodness. The fingers aim at usefulness and, over time, find elegance. Weaving measures seasons more kindly than calendars. In winter, cloth thickens. In summer, patterns open like lattices that share shade more generously with air. When lambs are few, warp counts adjust. When a cropping has been rich, colors get a stanza of celebration. Dye pots remember rain by how much they can afford to spill on the ground when the pot is finished. On stingy years, not a drop. On generous years, a splash offered to the earth like thanks. The loom becomes a ledger of weather and of will. Stories nest in textiles. A grandmother points at a band wrapped around a tent pole and tells the little history of a wind that pretended to be bigger than it was, and how that band, new then, held the line and refused to let noise become harm. A mother traces a motif with a finger and whispers the name of the child for whom that motif first appeared, adding, "You were hard to soothe as a baby, so I gave you this stepping pattern to teach your feet to walk away from anger." The child laughs, half embarrassed, half claimed by the cloth. A visiting cousin recognizes in a rug the same off-center diamond her own aunt used to prefer, and suddenly the tent feels like a room in her mother's house. When night comes, woven things take on a second life. Rugs underfoot turn warmth back at the soles, easing the body into sleep. Tent cloth loses its daytime duty of tempering light and becomes a dome for private starlight. Through tiny pores, not enough to chill, the sky sends a sparse, deliberate sparkle. A woven bag hung by the entrance catches moon and looks briefly like water. Somewhere a spindle, propped in a jar, waits with the patient attitude of tools that know they are loved. The loom sleeps, its warp lightly humming when a draft passes, the faintest echo of the day's careful music. If the desert can be said to be woven, it is woven like this, strong where it must be, open where it can be, patterned in memory rather than rigid geometry, ready to accept repair without shame. The Bedouin have learned this weave from land and animal and given it back in cloth. Under their tents, through their rugs, along their ropes, you can feel the argument the series keeps making. Survival is art when art is honest about survival. The desert rewards anyone who makes beauty serve, and it keeps, with surprising tenderness, the names of those who mend their world at the pace of a shuttle. In the earliest light. Before kettles begin their courteous fuss, A weaver sits and finds the thread end she left tucked under a neat knot. She draws it out, tests its temper between finger and lip, and sends the shuttle on its way. Under, over, under, over. The sound is a soft heartbeat for the morning. A child, half awake, listens to that rhythm and returns to sleep, believing, correctly, that the day will be held together. When the desert chooses night, it does not slam the door. It lowers it on quiet hinges. The last copper of daylight folds into blue, and the camp gathers itself by a logic older than clocks. A low fire wakes, not so much lit as persuaded, embers from the afternoon's tea coaxed under twigs and breath, then small sticks, then a patient handful of larger fuel that will glow more than it will flame. Around this warm punctuation mark, voices find their evening shape. If day is prose, measured, necessary, exact, night is poetry, and the fire is the page on which it is written. A circle forms without ceremony. Elders lean where the sand remembers their favorite posture. Women bring dates and a plate of flatbread that wears the day's flower like a blessing. Young men settle with the looseness of backs that have labored. Children arrange themselves in rings within rings, each nearer to sleep as the night ripens. Someone turns the kettle a finger width so its lid does not chatter. Someone else tucks an ember deeper to temper smoke. The small chores of comfort become choreography. And once everything sits in a kindness of order, the first song begins, not loudly, but like a story that was paused an evening ago and now resumes. Tea might be a camel song. The HDA with macron that lengthens the stride and straightens the mind. Sung softly now, as if remembering how its rhythm rides the animal's gait, the melody walks more than it climbs. A bar or two and the circle is swaying, bodies remembering the patience that carried the day. Words are close to the ground. Road, wind, thirst, the bell that kept faith. The refrain returns like a familiar well, always where it should be, and the second time it arrives, children know to join on the last word. No one instructs this. The fire has its own curriculum. Instruments appear from the edges of shadow the way stars do. After one, another, then more. A single-stringed rebab clears its throat. A frame drum enters like a new moon, subtle, then suddenly indispensable. An oud, brought by a guest who makes his rounds between tribes as seasons allow, leans its gentle weight into the evening. The first chords are not announcement but tuning of mood. The drum finds the camp's pulse, the walking tempo softened by tea, and lays it down like a rug everyone can stand on. Fingers brush strings and discover the key of tonight's air songs carry cargo. Memory, etiquette, maps. One ballad tells of a year when wind bullied the tents and elders taught the lines to hum back until the rope learned to like its labor. Another, shorter, praises a particular well by name, each verse a bucket, each bucket shared. Love songs travel too, but even they are desertwise. Promises are measured to the length of a day's march, affection described in terms of shade offered and water lifted. Longing is a horizon that stays honest and is therefore kind. Lullabies, when they come, are half instruction. Half spell, sleep like a camel at noon, breathe like wind under palm, dream where the rope does not fray. Babies do. And the circle smiles, between songs, proverbs make small bridges. Tie your camel, and then sing. Someone chuckles, and the drum taps a tiny agreement. Boil the tea, not the guest, answers another, and laughter lifts without poking holes in the night. Stories tuck themselves into these crossings. The time a bell camel refused a path and saved a caravan from a ground that looked strong but held emptiness beneath. The visit from traders who brought cloth dyed in a blue that remembered the sea. The day an impatient boy learned to place a peg deep enough to resist his own temper. The fire listens with everyone else, punctuating confession with a soft hiss, approval with a brief flare. The etiquette of the circle is as strict as it is gentle. Singers do not reach across each other's lines. They leave space the way tents leave alleys for wind to help rather than hurt. A new voice asks entry with a half verse. The current singer answers with a welcome in the same key. When an elder begins, instruments lean back and let the grain of age do the work. When a young woman's voice rises, the drum lowers its hand so the words can travel farther than pride. Tea arrives in its 3 acts, strong, stronger, sweetest, and with each cup the edges of the group grow softer, wider, more inclusive. Even the dogs remember not to argue. They curl and sigh and let the music use their breathing as a quiet metronome. There is improvisation, but it wears humility. A singer bends a line to fit a sudden wind shift, and the players follow without the look that asks, "Are you sure?" Trust is a tempo too. A verse forgets its own ending, and a child supplies it, rewarded not with applause but with a nod that says, "Yes, you are part of the cloth." Sometimes, a guest with a city instrument, polished, heavier, proud of its resonance, joins, and the circle accommodates, finding a pocket where the new voice does not overwhelm the old. The desert is not suspicious of novelty. It asks only that the new see the land the way the old does, as partner, not prize. The fire is managed the way songs are, by attention to what helps without waste. A stick added at the right moment saves 3 later. Flame raised too high will bully faces and chase nights cool away. Smoke is angled with a flat scrap so that it writes its thin line toward useless air, not noses. Sparks are read as omens. If they rise straight, tomorrow will be straightforward. If they flock toward a single side, wind will argue and the tense leeward pegs should be given a second thought. A child, yawning, watches these auguries and files them in the mind's cabinet where songs and rules share a drawer. Some nights the circle travels farther than the camp does. A saga is unrolled, the long measure of an ancestor's crossing, each verse a day of mercy or challenge. The drum becomes footfall, the rebab a horizon string, the oud a companionship of shade. The listeners make the journey from their places. A grandmother's hand forgets ache. A herdsman's knees remember an old ridge. A young girl sees a market she has not yet walked and feels its clamour as a polite breeze rather than a crowd. When the song delivers everyone back to the fire, the relief is real, as if distance had been folded and put away. Silence is not the enemy of song. It is its home. After a long peace, the circle lets quiet sit, unstartled. Stars seem to lean closer in such pauses. The kettle finds a tiny voice. Someone coughs softly and apologizes with the next pour. In that hush, grief can arrive without ceremony and be received without remedy. A short lament might rise, 2 notes, no ornaments, a name held like a cup, and when it ends, the drumming hand rests on the skin, cooling it, as if telling the instrument, "Enough, thank you." Sleep a little. Practical knowledge hides in lyrics the way water hides under stone. Verses teach the right knot for a fickle wind, the hour when goats will choose shade if left to courtesy, the taste of a well after 3 days of cloud. Children remember these not because they were drilled, but because they rhymed when the fire was kind and everyone's attention had become a calm lake. Tomorrow, when a boy tests a peg and feels it sulk, the line will spring to his tongue. Turn it a handspan where the dune's breath falls, and he will. If asked how he knew, he will shrug and say, "It's in the song." Night has measures within measures. Early evening is for news. Later is for memory. Latest is for promises so soft they almost don't exist in daylight. Lovers exchange lines no one else catches. A father leans to a son and passes a duty like a melody. A widow smiles at a verse that lets her keep sorrow without carrying it alone. The circle shrinks as children are carried to rugs whose patterns dream them further in. The drum's strokes lengthen. The oud changes to the key of sleep. On certain nights, cold, crystalline, the Milky Way is a chorus that cannot be ignored. Songs thin to make room. Voices drop to murmurs, then to breath. Even the fire agrees to be less, content with embers that look like little planets. A final piece is sung without words, only a shared hum that finds exactly the note where comfort lives. No one admits to leading it. It is the sound the camp makes when it knows itself intact. When the last tea is poured and the last ember turned to keep from biting the sand, the circle releases itself back into the tent city that held it. Instruments are wrapped. The kettle is thanked with a cloth. The small ash is squared and covered, a promise written in grey that dawn will find easy to read. Sleep spreads like shade in slow motion. Somewhere a camel kneels heavily and dreams ancient patient dreams. The night keeps singing for a while after the people are done. Wind in the guy lines, coals whispering. a dog's breath-keeping time, and then, at last, the desert turns the page and lets silence have the last stanza. Silence is not the absence of sound along a caravan's line. It is the arrangement of sounds into mercy. Before dawn, when tents are still stars pinned to the earth, the caravan assembles itself in hush, ropes stacked in patient coils, loads balanced low like promises a person can keep. Bell camel led forward with a hand at his cheek and a word that means both friend and mourning. Hooves test the sand with the courtesy of guests entering a home. A kettle's last sigh is folded away. Embers are tamped into a gentle memory. Then the camp, which sang last night, chooses the quieter register of travel day. The first miles are a lesson in measured quiet. Sand takes the imprint of fate without complaint. The bell writes its single note on the air and lets wind carry the ink. Voices are small, so breath can do its better work elsewhere. Even children, whose joy natters by reflex, learn the delight of pointing rather than calling. There, a fox's neat beads in the powder. There, a ribbon of old flood silt now firm enough to spare ankles. There, a line of palms distant as punctuation at the end of a long sentence. The hush is affectionate, not severe. It is the quiet of a library in which every book is open to the same page. Get there kindly, silence along the line has texture. There is the padded hush of pads meeting cool morning sand, an almost velvet sound. There is the soft grit talk of a strap adjusted on the move, the whisper of woven cloth finding its best angle to the breeze, the tiny symbol of a metal cup settled more securely in a bag. A goat bleats once, then decides it has said enough. A dog trots with its mouth open, tongue making a small metronome. The rebuke of noon is still far away. The hush is generous. If a joke is told, it is told with eyes and eyebrows first, then with a line so brief the bell is never asked to argue with it. Guides shape silence as surely as they shape roots. A lifted hand edits a conversation before it becomes panting. A pause, shared like a small pearled bead down the line, tells the caravan to sip now, not later. When the wind runs cross-grain, the guide leans and the whole column leans, becoming a single long instrument played by air. If a stranger appears at the far edge of a dune, a lone figure, a small cloud of dust, the quiet grows attentive rather than nervous. The bell keeps its sentence. The line closes a little. The greeting, when it arrives, is soft and sufficient. Peace, water, shade, origin, destination. The desert likes such conversations, brief courtesies that waste neither coolness nor trust. Caravans of silence are arrangements of care. Loads are balanced not only for the animal's sake but for the soundscapes. A poorly tied bundle will clack and nag, dragging attention into annoyance. A good tie creates the quiet that allows mind to be generous, to notice hawk and mirage without resenting the day. The bell's tone is tuned with cloth at its clapper so it speaks in a civil voice. The wrong bell is exchanged at the next market, and no one mocks the owner for the oversight because everyone has once asked a bell to say too much. Water skins hang where rope hum will not bruise them. Silence is engineered as deliberately a shade. There is a moral to this quiet. It shares. A caravan that does not shout can hear. The land answers with small gifts, faint trickles of air sliding down a dune's cool face, the far-off punctuation of a palm front clacking, the early warning of drift sand hissing over a hardpan patch. A traveller who has kept the world's volume low will catch these details in time to adjust a choice. Such anticipations look like luck to the hurried. To the listening, they are payments on interest earned by courtesy. Sometimes the silence breaks by design. A song begins, not the raucous chant of celebration, but the travelling line with long vowels that lie down and rest as they go. The bell camel's steps lengthen a little under its touch. Children regain the beat they lost to fascination with beetle highways. The herd aligns its spines to the sound the way iron filings reach toward a magnet. Then, as suddenly as it came, the song is allowed to fold back into the quiet. The day accepts the fold gratefully. Speech returns to single-sip sentences. Meetings on the open sand are orchestras of restraint. Two caravans sight each other, and distance provides the overture, lines compact. Bells converse across a valley in measured phrases. Guides raise their staffs not like weapons but like shepherds making their flocks visible. As the columns pass, always downwind of each other so sense speak politely, news is unrolled in minimal strips, the well north of the salt flat tastes of iron this week. A storm reshaped the doubleback dune to something closer to the long breath. A trader is 2 days behind with indigo that pretends to be sea. The exchanges are so quiet they could be missed by anyone listening for drama. But drama is not the desert's economy. Precision is, within the caravan, silence stores tenderness. A mother walking at a camel's hip taps the side of the saddle twice, the code for "I'm here," so a sleeping child in the howdah turns in dreams toward the sound and smiles. A young herder, embarrassed by yesterday's sharp word, walks 3 paces behind the elder he stung and matches his footsteps to the older man's as apology. No phrase is needed, and the elder's pack shifts a fraction to the side to make room for the contrition to walk with them. A girl, at the back with the slowest goat, learns to make a kissing sound that doesn't carry, a breath signal that belongs to just the last 3 animals, and says, "We are good. We are together. We are not forgotten." Quiet is a grammar for affection. There are days when silence is duty. Heat lies too heavy on heads. Thirst presses its thumb into the throat's hollow. Then the hush is decisive, a shield against waste. Voices conserve water. Minds shrink projects into careful steps. Rest is called sooner and called with a hand rather than a shout. If someone falters, 2 others arrive on either side without fanfare, and the caravan's bracket shape becomes a cradle until the falter regulates to the days-long pulse. No heroics are performed. Heroics would be noisy. What saves is the practiced courtesy of moving as many bodies with as few words as possible. The land itself encourages reticence. Flats throw sound farther than you intend. Dunes swallow it completely. A laugh aimed carelessly at the sky can arrive at a hawk's ear as a distress call. A warning meant for a child can die at your own shoulder if placed too low in the lee. So the Bedouin pitch their voices like tents, at angles that help the wind work for them. Names are spoken close. Instructions are pitched to the moving ear. The world is addressed as a partner with good hearing. It answers. Silence also covers the caravan the way a cloak covers a sleeper. At night, the day's hush settles into deeper rest. Animals fold their legs with the slow-knuckle grace that always looks like a prayer. The bell is slipped off and set where it will dream quietly in bronze. The last metal cup finds its nest in woven cloth. Somewhere a dog remembers one more patrol and pads to the edge of camp, looking out into the wide and finding nothing that needs a bark. Stars lift, and the dunes, pleased, grow a shade sharper at their rims. The hush thickens until even the kettles, those talkative friends, agree to be still. In markets. When the caravan finally trades silence for noise, the exchange is not complete. Bedouin ears keep their desert habits even in clamour. A loud vendor is gently avoided. The stall with a rope that does not creak wins a longer visit. A musician who knows how to play beneath conversation draws the tribe's best coin. Purchases are weighed not only on scales but in acoustics. Will this bell speak reasonably? Will this pot avoid the fussy chatter that makes mornings worse? Will this new leather soften its voice with oil and use? The noisier the market, the more the desert's quiet proves its value as a way to judge. When a caravan arrives at kin, the first minutes are still quiet. Hugs take sound, but not much. Kisses land with small clouds of dust. Laughter grows, but from a low seed. The loudest noise is a goat objecting to sudden temporary penning. The calm expands. Then, slowly, the music of reunion rises. More speech, brighter voices, drums that remember celebration. Yet even then, those who love the road glance once at the bell, at the ropes, at the animal's eyes, and make the small adjustments that will let tomorrow's leaving be as gentle as today's arrival. The desert's hush has taught them to arrange life with a respect for how sound carries into the next day. There are sayings for caravans of silence. Travel so the sand remembers your kindness, not your quarrels. Let your bell speak, and keep your tongue from envying it. A whisper shared by many feet becomes a country. Elders repeat these without scolding, weaving them into stories and jokes so that children adopt them without feeling lectured. In time, the children will discover that the sayings are not decoration. They are maps invisible to anyone looking only with their eyes. By the last light. When the day's road lies rolled up behind like a well-used rug, the caravan's quiet feels like a completed craft. Tents bloom from bundles. Peg seat with 2 light taps. The kettle remembers its script. The bell is wrapped and hung. Its silence is added to the camp like a final chord held until the air agrees to rest. If words are spoken, they are small words. Thanks, the names of those who walked well today. Instructions placed exactly where tomorrow will find them. The fire accepts its spark and promises to speak at the right volume. Faces soften. Children's restless feet answer the day's soft cadence with sleep. Food in the desert tastes of choices. Every mouthful is a small biography of restraint and skill, of fires kept honest and water spent wisely. Long before a pot warms or a knife meets a fruit, the day has begun to season the meal, wind drying mint on a line. A child brushing sand from a palm mat where dough will be folded. An elder pinching a grain of salt between finger and memory, measuring not by habit but by weather. If city kitchens can hide mistakes in abundance, Bedouin meals reveal care in simplicity. Here, flavor is not crowded. It is invited and listened to. Dates are the beginning of many kindnesses. They arrive as brown lanterns in the palms, heavy with the sun's patient work, and pass down into baskets, then bowls, then hands. There are stages and names, fresh and tender, sun-sugared and firm, dried and wise. Each asks for a different treatment. The first, soft as a promise, is split with a thumb and offered with morning tea, its sweetness tipping the day toward good humor. The second, more composed, rides in the stallbag and keeps its dignity through heat and jostle. The third, dense with history, becomes a storehouse of quiet energy for the long afternoon. You taste not just sugar, but shade, rope, and prayer. Sand has a taste too, not because people choose it, but because the world is honest. It arrives in the meal as a rumor rather than an ingredient, a faint grit at the edge of bread when wind mischiefs the kneading. A single crystal that clicks against a tooth and reminds the eater to slow down, to thank the cook who kept most of the world out of the pot. Cooks in the desert are gatekeepers of small perfections. They angle boards, weight cloths, station a child to shoe dust with a palm frond at the precise angle that turns wind from bully to helper. The best meals are not free of the land. They are conversations with it. Bread is the most eloquent conversation. A handful of flour, a pinch of salt, a patient drizzle of water measured by feel rather than cup. The dough is born in a bowl that has seen generations of mornings. It rests under cloth that breathes like a tent. Then it is flattened with knuckles and heel, little suns pressed into discs. The fire is banked low, more ember than flame. A hot stone or a convex pan receives the dough, and in seconds the flat circle becomes a moon that swells in size. The smell is an argument for civilization as whispered as the series title promises. Boring history, perhaps, to those who prefer spectacle. To those who prefer sleep and truth, the most comforting history of all, tea is more ceremony than drink, and dates are its precise companion. The first pour is strong, bitter with leaves boiled a heartbeat past politeness. A date answers that sternness with a soft word, and the two together make balance. The second pour is stronger but smoother, and the date's sweetness changes from rescue to partnership. The third pour is sweetest. By then, the date is a memory, and the tongue can handle sugar without surprise. In this sequence, you can taste an ethics, begin honest, become generous, end kind. Milk travels through the day with similar tact. The morning's first stream is given to the very young and the very old. The rest is warmed just enough to coax its sweetness. In seasons of plenty, yogurt cools the noon. In leaner times, milk is stretched, sung to with a spoon until it becomes a thin, bright drink that tells the body, we are still a family. Butter is worked with breath and patience. Ghee is stored like a gold that happens to feed you. When a guest arrives, a knob of that gold shines in a pot, and the guest hears a welcome sizzling before he tastes it. Spices are not a parade. They are a pronunciation guide. Cumin clarifies. Coriander's citrus whispers. Cinnamon remembers winter nights. Black lime, If a trader's route has been generous, sharpens a stew the way a proverb sharpens thought. Salt is the elder, respected, never ignored. Even the way it is thrown is moral, high and sparing, a flurry that lands like snow rather than a clump that bullies. The desert has fewer flavors than gardens, but it teaches how to listen to the ones it has until each reveals a choir. Meat is rare enough to be grateful for and common enough to remember how to cook kindly. A goat offered to a celebration is praised before it is prepared. Its work is acknowledged to children so that they learn the distance between living and eating without fear or sentimentality. Cuts are chosen to match patience, the tough for the pot that will simmer through stories, the tender for the quick pan when rest must be swift. Bones are boiled into broths that taste of loyalty. Nothing is wasted except hurry. Smoke is trained to leave politely through a seam. A lid is propped with a date pit, the smallest wedge, the perfect tool. On the march, lunch is a philosophy more than a feast. A date, a small handful of nuts, a strap of dried meat softened in the mouth while the bell keeps time. These are not deprivations. They are wisdoms. Heavier meals arrive with shade. A pot of lentils is the desert's essay on patience, sorted by a child's careful fingers. Washed in the basin where each swirl is red for grit. Then set with onion and a whisper of spice until it becomes more than it is. Bread wipes the pot clean, and the gesture says as much about thrift as it does about affection for the cook. Green surprises the Bedouin palate like rain surprises the horizon. A sprig of mint resurrected in water. A slice of cucumber that seems impossible. A few leaves from an oasis garden traded for stories. These lift a meal's mood without asking for applause. When markets are near, tomatoes arrive like punctuation, bright commas that tell the tongue to pause and smile. A little onion, a flash of pepper, a lemon's half-breath. These are rumors of abundance used to frame gratitude, not to drown it. Children learn the table without table. They are taught where to sit so wind is their friend. How to offer with the right hand and the right angle. How to tear bread so it becomes both utensil and kindness. The bowl turns. Hands enter and retreat in a choreography of fairness. The best bits go to elders and guests not because anyone is less hungry but because hunger is tamed by respect. There is joy here, not morality scold. Laughter when a piece of bread escapes and becomes a little boat on stew. Applause when a young hand lifts a piece for an aunt without prompt. The meal teaches the manners that keep a wandering people unified that if sand creeps in, and sand will, you learn to smile at the desert's autograph. A bite with a click becomes a joke. It wants to be in our story, too. But there are crafts to reduce even this. A line of woven reed catching dust before it reaches the hearth. A match shaken upwind rather than down. A pot lid that was oiled at its edges, so grains glide off rather than cling. These are the details that make a cook admired as much as a guide. Both read the land. Both make the day edible. Dessert is usually restraint, yet sometimes, at weddings or after a good market, sweetness blooms. Honey appears, amber that looks like stored sunset. A syrup of dates turns fritters into small moons glazed with abundance. Children become astronomers, tracking the orbit of a second piece with eyes wide enough to contain the whole sky. Even then, the portion is measured, not stingy but sane. The Bedouin palate does not chase astonishment. It courtships contentment. After the meal, the fire returns to its quieter job, drying a pot's last film, making a place for stories to rise like steam. The taste of sand and dates remains in the mouth as an afterword, reminding everyone that survival can be delicious when it is deliberate. Fingers smell of smoke and spice. Lips carry a faint echo of salt and sugar. The tongue rests, satisfied not by volume but by proportion. A final sip, water or tea depending on the hour, writes the period, and then, as kettles are placed to one side and bowls nested for morning, someone segments a last date and shares it around, a dark crescent moving hand to hand. The piece is small, enough for one gentle bite. It tastes like a kept promise, sweet, but not loud, complete, but asking for nothing more. In that modest sweetness lies a design for living. Take what is enough, share what is good, let the land season you with patience, and leave the rest to the stars. The desert's first tongue is wind. Long before people drew borders on maps or scratched alphabets into bone and bark, air was touring the dunes, telling sand where to sleep and stones when to turn their faces. The Bedouin learned this language the way a child learns the voice of a parent, by listening while doing, by imitating without ceremony, by surviving through comprehension. If our earlier segments spoke of wind as a guide, tonight we sit nearer and learn its vocabulary, the small words that shape a day, the grammar that keeps a camp whole. The poetry that arrives when air decides to sing start with consonants, the touches and taps that a tent hears through its ropes. A light cross breeze plucks the guy lines with a muted M, a hum that says, yes, the angle is good and the knots are neither vain nor lazy. A stiffening gust turns that M into KH, rougher in the throat of the chord, a throat clearing that asks for a peg 2 hands deeper or a line moved half a palm to the left. When the ridge seam emits a dry S, it is not scolding. It is asking for the flap to tilt, to make a thin corridor where air can pass without complaint. Children learn these sounds as letters. What does that one say? A girl asks, nose lifted to a trembling rope. It says, I can help if you let me. Her aunt answers, and the lesson is complete. Vowels are the broader voices over the dunes. An R, low and wide, rolls down the windward slope when morning is merciful and the sand is firming under cool. A tight E hisses along the brink when noon wants to sharpen every edge. The crest cuts and the lee avalanches in a dozen small, precise slides. The rare singing dune is a long, held O, a bowl of sound that seems to have no mouth. When it occurs, people fall silent without being told. You feel it in your ribs, a cathedral made by grains agreeing to move together, each giving the next permission to tremble. No one pretends control over such music. The camp receives it, counts itself lucky, remembers the exact shade of the sky. There are dialects of wind the way there are dialects of kin. From the north, a teacher's tone, cool, corrective, clean. From the south, a warm uncle who tells stories too long but forgives lateness. East wind at dawn is the friend who brings bread. East at noon is the cousin who jokes too hard. West wind at sunset is a lullaby that tastes faintly of salt on certain roots, a rumor of seas the goats have never seen. The wise do not argue with dialects. They soften their own speech to match. It is impolite to pitch a voice against a guest's accent. It is foolish to pitch a tent against a wind's. Tools exist that look like instruments because they are. A strip of palm leaf tacked to a pole becomes a thin reed that whispers direction precisely enough to settle which edge of cloth should be raised. A slender bone hung from a line clicks or quiets depending on crossflow. Elders pass its position by habit, not checklist, the way a musician reaches for a mute to bring a brass line down into night's key. In some camps, a sliver of shell tied at the tent's peak is the appointed herald of turbulence. When it chatters, tea is moved, embers are banked, stories swap places with tasks that can be done with eyes narrowed and mouths covered. No one worships these small devices. They simply belong to the lexicon. Proverbs give grammar to the language. Bow and you will hold. Lean and you will go. The wind is loudest when you argue with it. Lift shade to greet a guest. Lower it to greet the noon. The young recite these as games and grow into them as rules. The most useful proverb, perhaps, is also the gentlest. Let the wind finish its sentence. It means, don't rush to fix what a gust merely announces. Wait a breath. The next phrase may contradict or complete it. In this patience lies safety. Many a snapped line belongs to a hand that answered too quickly. Wind rewrites maps, but not without signals. Before a line of dunes swings its hips and alters the path you knew, the shrubs at its base will comb in a new direction, their brittle leaves carving tiny hairlines in the sand. Before drift covers the hardpan track, you will hear the needle rain of grain striking tougher ground. Before a wadi becomes treacherous, a perfume of baked clay will darken, not visible at first, but knows true. The camp keeps a lexicon of these hints the way a family keeps recipes. Spoken, corrected by taste, never written. Animals are fluent. A camel, as we've said, will narrow its nostrils to a kind scowl that reads, "Dust is on the way, dear heart." Goats tuck their flanks against a cart's leaf for breaths before anyone mentions moving the cart. Dogs lift their noses like readers lifting their heads at a new chapter. Then they choose patrol or curl, depending on tense. To learn from animals is not to admit ignorance. It is to add dictionaries. A boy asked why the route shifted before the guide staff rose. His aunt nodded toward the lead camel's ear. You can listen with those ears, she smiled, or only with your own. The first way we arrive rested. Gesture is syntax. 2 fingers spread. The flap lifts 2 hands. A palm turned edgewise. Do not widen, only tilt. A circling finger pointed at the ground. Retire lower. Motion drawn horizontally with a flat hand. Thin the fire, because the wind will thicken it if you let it. The quiet of a caravan depends on these small grammar marks more than on shouted command. In market towns, where noise steals clarity, the same gestures keep a camp from forgetting its native language. A lowered palm near a tense horse. A quick tapping of the wrist near a boastful merchant. Easy, friend, easy. Wind has taught them a way to speak that accepts no waste. There is poetry too, of course. Lovers borrow wind. A scarf lifted just enough to flutter says I am near more reliably than a call, which dies in the sand's plush throat. A mother soothing a fretful child faces the tense opening and lets the breeze carry her hush across the little brow. Cool, then kinder. 2 elders arguing fine points of a story will change sides of the fire when smoke insists on sabotaging one of them. The victor is the one who knows how to place his account in the current that enters ears happily. The language of wind, like all languages, is finally an ethics of attention. Storms speak in paragraphs, and their rhetoric should not be mocked. When a haboob clears its throat in the distance, a brown wall marching under pale sky, there is no debate class, only procedure. Guylines mapped, mouths veiled, animals bracketed, edges lowered until the tent becomes a turtle. Inside, the wind's long run-on sentence fills the world. Children learn to hear punctuation, a slam at the ridge, period, brace. A quick drum on the windward cloth, comma, breathe. A long-throated bass that seems to rise from the sand itself, colon, wait for the second clause. Fear recedes when sound is given names. When the paragraph ends, the camp answers with nouns, pegs, broom, kettle. Conversation resumes in human grammar. On mild days. Wind writes in italics, slanted, alive, delicate. A tent ribbed with light flexes, and the air cools 2 fingers near the ground where children roll their small cars carved from olive wood. The mashk, hung where current strokes it most sweetly, beads and whispers that water will taste like mercy by afternoon. The loom's warp murmurs. The weft replies. The shuttle's quiet click agrees. The sentence that day says, do your work at a pace air can bless. When people go wrong with wind, it is often because they assign it malice. The Bedouin assign it appetite and habit. It is hungry for edges, they say, so we give it edges it may eat, cloth flaps. Read screens, rather than our patience. It forgets itself at noon, they laugh, so we schedule memory for morning and evening. It loves corridors, they add, so we build corridors it may run through and leave the rest of our house alone. In turning force into character, the tribe turns problem into partner and attention into craft. Even the market learns a little of this speech on days when traders from many roads converge. Stalls that breathe sell better. A carpet slung so air can stroke it softly will reveal its hand more honestly than one hung stiff. Pots arranged to avoid clutter make a soundscape that invites rather than repels. A vendor who has lived under cloth that converses with wind knows to lower his voice and lift his shade. His customers linger. Those who fight the day with glare and shout find their wares dusty and their tempers the same at 18 night. The lexicon contracts to lullaby. The big words rest. The small ones work. A seam tick-ticks in the corner where thread wants a friend. Someone obliges with 3 quick stitches. A line grazes its peg in a rhythm that says, turn me once. I will sleep. The kettle's steam is a consonant against the tense vowel. A camel's long exhale is a paragraph break that sends the camp to the next page. If the moon is up, even shadows seem to breathe, rising and falling on the cloth as if practicing the day's phrases for tomorrow. The language of wind does not claim exclusivity. It lives beside the languages of stars and sand and water, sharing roots, trading idioms. A proverb in one tongue often reads smoothly in the other. Let the wind finish its sentence becomes let the sand finish its footprint, becomes let the well finish its reflection. Together they write the Bedouin's dictionary of caution and grace. Nothing in it is grand. Everything in it works. An oasis is the desert's quiet handshake with mercy. Long before a traveler sees water, the palms announce it, crowns lifted like green lanterns, trunks scribbling their vertical certainty into a landscape that prefers horizontals. Under those leaves, shade is different from tent shade. It is porous and alive, patterned in 1,000 small coins of light that drift and overlap as the breeze negotiates with fronds. Where tents control the sun, palms converse with it. The result is dapple, a softness that persuades the body to forgive noon, approach slowly, and the air itself changes its voice. It grows heavier with promise, cooler by a few faithful degrees, fragrant with two notes that always arrive together, wet earth and date sugar. The ground underfoot remembers water even when it doesn't show it, tamped by years of human passage and the patient hooves of animals who also know this address by heart. A low wall of stone, nothing proud, only practical, keeps the lightest sand from gossiping into the channels where water walks. Between trunks, woven mats appear the way sentences appear between paragraphs, guiding feet and work without scolding. Somewhere a jug sweats on a shaded shelf, beating like a relieved brow. Palms build architecture from light. The canopy is a roof with 1,000,000 adjustable shingles. When the wind quickens, the roof hums and the floor flickers, and the mind, which has had to be narrow on the open dunes, gladly widens again. Beneath this roof, the oasis organizes itself into layered lives. High, where dates fatten in dusty chandeliers, the year's calendar hangs, brown gold and deliberate. Midway, fronds cast a lattice generous enough to protect, open enough to breathe. Low, where the shade is fullest, crops borrow coolness, barley bending into small ripples, herbs bright and brief, cucumbers like improbable green smiles, melons hiding under leaves like shy moons. The whole scene is a diagram of kindness arranged by height. Water is not wasted here. It is arranged. Channels, narrow as a forearm, sometimes narrower, carry the sky's old gift in measured threads. A small gate fashioned from palm rib opens. A trickle turns left. Another closes. The trickle walks right. The sound is a whisper more felt than heard, a private sentence between soil and root. In this irrigation grammar, verbs are few and accurate. Turn, wait, share, settle. A boy learns to place a stone exactly where the flow needs to thin, not to show off but to obey physics learned from elders who learn from elders who learned from a land. The oasis keeps minutes not with clocks but with shadows hitting certain knots in the trunks. Time to move the gate. Time to turn the pot. Time to call goats from their daydreaming corners. Date palms are work in every direction. Climbing them is a practice in trust. Rope around the trunk, hands remembering old bark that has its own memory of hands, feet finding those crosshatched stubs where fronds once held their stations. Up high, a person becomes a slow metronome against the sky, trimming, thinning, tying clusters so their weight won't tear their own generosity loose. Pollen travels cup to cup on a human schedule, an intimacy between tree and hand that city people romanticize and oasis people simply call the morning. When harvest comes, baskets lower like calm comets. Below, children count softly, learning numbers by sweetness. Hospitality adopts a different tone under palms. Guests are sat where patterns of light will flatter faces and keep eyes kind. Tea tastes like it remembers a river, even if the nearest true river is a story told by trade. Dates arrive in varieties that speak dialects, soft, hunted halves for greeting. Firm, travelling kinds for pockets later. Dense elders for the third cup, when talk can afford depth. Bread seems lighter here. The shade raises it like a polite hand under a child's elbow, and it bubbles on the sage with the confidence of something that knows it is loved. Cracked bowls of yogurt gleam. Cool as moonlight, and herbs, mint, basil. Whatever the season allowed, scatter their small arguments across the meal, each argument ending in agreement. The oasis is school, clinic, market, and theatre at once. Under a certain palm, the one with the double bend like a camel's neck, children chant lines about irrigation order, their voices thin silver wires braiding into lesson. On a rug set where air moves best, an elder coaxes a child's fever down with a damp cloth and the lotion of shade. The fronds take turns fanning a body that needs to be reminded how to release heat. At the far edge, two families bargain by layers rather than price. Dates for wool, wool for a promise of help at harvest, the promise for a marriage considered next season. The palms witness everything, gossiping only in leaves. Even animals adopt the oasis manners. Camels fold themselves into architecture, becoming pillars in the colonnade of trunks. Goats stand in skinny triangles of shadow, mastering geometry by comfort. A dog moves from one coin of cool to the next, an astronomer of shade tracking the sun's slow orbit across the canopy. Bees write their small, competent lines between blossoms and the little puddled margins where water rests. Their music is a higher key than the frond's steady hush. Even flies, those ambassadors of annoyance, lose some of their politics. The dapple confuses their ambitions, and they decide to argue somewhere else. Maintenance is reverence. Dead fronds are taken down before they fall and used without insult, woven into windbreaks, laid as gentle teeth at the edge of channels to slow water, burned to scent tea when their last usefulness is flame. Fallen dates are not scorned. They are gathered for animals or for a sweet paste that will remember this season when the wind writes a leaner chapter. The little dam is checked for holes made by roots too assertive. A fingerdip of mud closes the argument. Nets are mended. A ladder's lashings are retied. Everywhere, the ethics of palms and people are the same. Hold, breathe, share, mend. There is etiquette for heat even here. Midday belongs to quiet, speech shortened, chores edited, rest written into the body like a commandment that wears no burden. The shade is not a luxury, it is law. A traveller who tries to pay for coolness is gently refused. Drink first, the host says, hand already making the pour. Talk later. The voice doesn't rise. The fronds do that on its behalf, their long fingers lifting and falling as if applauding the simplest decency. Children nap. Elders tell stories whose first sentences are fanned into clauses by the breeze and whose last sentences are folded into the pause that comes before tea. There is also this. Palms carry the memory of rain without needing rain to prove itself today. Somewhere far up valley, in months you weren't there to witness, a storm had the manners to linger. The aquifer listened and took in what it was given. The oasis is the bookmark where that chapter can be found again. So standing here, you share water with strangers across time, rain that dressed other dunes, thunder that ignored other fires, clouds that never saw these goats. Gratitude becomes less about the person who opened the gate for you and more about the invisible architecture of generosity beneath your feet. Tea dusk, the shade deepens into rooms. The frond's green cools toward ink. Voices rise a little. Day's work narrated in the easier key that evening permits. Someone climbs one last time to cut a frond that sulked all day. Someone else sets a lamp so its circle of amber joins hands with the last sunlight. The channels are narrowed to threads. Water makes a final polite circuit and rests. Dates that hung like hours now look like commas, telling the night to pause often. The oasis exhale is audible, a long H that tells lungs it is safe to fill all the way. Night under palms is its own weather. The fronds become the sky's second eyelashes. Stars blink through them in a rhythm that sends children to sleep between one pattern and the next. A small breeze pretends to be a creek and almost succeeds. Lamps are hooded and then, one by one, convinced to go out. Sleep here is different than under the tent on the open flats. It is deeper sooner, as if the body trusts that shade still exists even with the sun gone. If dreams arrive, they carry water, clear, unhurried, shared. When dawn returns, it does so in steps down the trunks, grey at the crown, blue at the knots, gold at the root. Birds that lived all night as modest commas become exclamation points for a few minutes, reminding everyone that the day exists beyond transactions. The first gate opens. A new sentence of water begins. Someone cuts a date cluster and pats it like a camel's neck. The kettle points its spout toward a low patch where the breeze has already declared its route. And over the whole scene, the palms keep offering their oldest definition, shade as an agreement, between sun and leaf, between leaf and wind, between wind and work, that turns survival into ease and ease into gratitude. The oasis teaches a lesson the desert keeps repeating in different costumes. Arrange yourself so the land can help you, and it will. A tent can be lifted and tilted. A rope can be tuned. A flyer of sand can be read. And here, in this green grammar, a leaf can be made to speak for mercy. Palms are not miracles. They are muscles of an underground kindness flexing where the eye can finally see it. To sit under them is to sit in a proof. Markets are the desert's brief cities, raised at dawn, shining by noon, and folded back into the horizon by evening as if they had only been a mirage with good manners. They form where roots kiss, a shallow bowl between dunes, the lee of a palm-fringed wadi, the stony shoulder of a plain where wind behaves. From far away you sense a market before you see it, a soft embroidery of movement against stillness, the shy glint of brass, the quiet punctuation of tethered camels. Voices pitched low and warm so they do not spend the days cool too quickly. For a tribe that measures wealth in water and patience, a market is not noise. It is arrangement. It gathers need and needs answers into a circle and teaches them to trade fairly. The first arrivals draw lines on the sand that will become streets. A tent unfurls in a practiced rectangle. 2 poles rise, then 2 more. Ropes hum into their pegs. A rug is shaken into morning's clean light, and that single rectangle declares a shop as clearly as any wall of stone. Goods are not poured out as if to overwhelm appetite. They are placed with intention that reads like courtesy. A string of copper bowls nested small to large. A meandering line of dates dark as polished wood. A single saddle, its leather oiled, its stitching proud, set on a trivet so anyone may test its give without stooping. Windbreaks of reed and palm rib lift to make shade that shares more than a hoard's. The market's grammar is visible already. Show clearly. Invite gently. Leave room for passing, smells write the day's first sentence. Cardamom opens its green mouth. Cumin smiles, precise as a proverb. Coffee thinks aloud on the brazier. Bread rises like a quiet argument no one wants to end. A kettle announces 3 acts of tea. A skewer of meat offers its small theatrical smoke. Children, who will be conscripted into patience soon enough, get a brief holiday to chase these aromas and return with reports. The man with the indigo has set his cloth high. The woman who braids bands has a new pattern like steps. The honey is thick like last year. The elders, whose currency is comparison, nod and file these notes alongside old memories. The year a salt caravan came singing. The season a drought made saffron a story rather than a spice. Here, haggling is not combat. It is a recital. Buyer and seller step through lines they both know, testing the weave of each other's reasons. Your tent will hum better with this rope, the weaver says, plucking it to prove the note. It will hum regardless, if my knots are good, the buyer answers, smiling. A price is offered, a proverb exchanged. Boil the tea, not the guest, and the number softens as the air does. The best bargains are not the lowest numbers. They are the ones that leave each party able to meet again with untroubled eyes. A child watches an aunt move 3 dates from the seller's bowl to the buyer's palm and understands that arithmetic here includes respect. Trade is layered, goods, news, and promises braided together. A worn mare is exchanged for a younger goat and a pledge to help mend a distant well's gate after the next moon. Cloth travels from north to south while a story travels from south to north. And at evening the cloth will warm someone who has never seen the north. And the story will comfort someone who has never seen the sea. There are coins, but the desert distrusts heavy purses. Better to carry a reputation that opens doors and earns cups of water without counting. Markets record these reputations the way dunes record wind. Subtly, in patterns you feel more than see. The loud seller prospers once. The steady one prospers again, sound in the market stays modest. Musicians sit in galleries of shade and play beneath conversation, a frame drum keeping a considerate heart, a rebab threading thin silver through the middle of the day, an oud that understands how to praise without pushing. Every so often a singer begins a travelling couplet, 2 lines that can be added to by anyone with courtesy, and the melody drifts from one stall to the next, collecting verses about wells and roots and weather. Laughter rises like sparrows startled and settles just as quickly. If someone shouts, it is to stop a goat from adopting someone else's melons, and after the goat is corrected the air restores itself to good sense. Commerce is also craft on display. A saddle maker oils a strap with the concentration of a poet weighing a word. The shine spreads like an argument that cannot be refuted. A blacksmith reminds a kettle of its roundness with a handful of persuasive taps. A pot answers by ringing dull to bright as it becomes itself. A woman at a small ground loom throws a shuttle as casually as she breathes, and in an hour an ankle band appears, patterned with a road's memory, diamonds step like dunes, a border tight as morning. Children lean, memorize, mimic with scraps, and are not chased away. Markets are schools with moving roofs. There is a geography to the stalls that respects the day. Perishables and tenderness sit deeper in shade. Leather and metal choose the breezier lanes. Spices perch where the wind can carry their invitations without stealing their stock. The water seller positions himself where the ground remembers dampness. His jars sweat with the kind of honesty that earns trust at a glance. Near him, a boy with ice shaved from a far mountain. Luxury that sometimes appears as miracle, glows like a secret. Elders buy a mouthful not to show wealth but to remember youth. Nothing here is random. Even the path taken by a basket maker to and from her weaving is a decision. She walks where cloth laid over sand won't pick up grit, and the lanes remain as edible as they can be. Friendship has its rituals. 2 families that have not met since last market greet each other by exchanging burdens. One holds the other's child, one lifts the other's basket, and stand like that while news is told. Engagements are hinted at with the movement of eyes to a young man's careful saddle or a young woman's attentive band at the tent rope. Disagreements are postponed with a phrase that means nothing more or less than after tea, which rarely arrives without dissolving the need to disagree. The market protects these relationships by design. The circle ensures that no one can be embarrassed by having to walk past the same faces twice without reconciliation. Trouble visits sometimes. The desert does not pretend otherwise. A gust pulls a pole and an old tent leans like a tired man. For hands hold it up before a name is spoken. A child is lost for a moment and then found where the honey seller told stories too well. Apologies are folded into a date and a promise to listen with eyes next time. A trader swears his cloth is indigo from a distant river, and a woman smiles and proves with a wetted finger and a white thread that it is not. The price softens, the thread dries, and no pride is ruined. Markets teach that dignity is repair. Noise would only postpone it.at noon. Shade becomes law. Stalls tilt their valances lower. Lanes narrow into kindness. Talk edits itself to essentials. The brazier that brewed coffee becomes a little kitchen for lentils. Bread appears, puffed into moons, and tears into suns. Yogurt drops its cool white on hot tongues and the market breathes again. Many deals wait until after this rearranged hour, because nothing honest should be priced by a face clenched against heat. Under a palm's dapple, the ink of the day resets. The afternoon is for settling promises into objects. Ropes that will hold in weather are walked through hands one last time. The new saddle is shortened a hole for the nephew who grew. A pot is tapped and tapped until its roundness answers yes in the key the buyer trusts. Animals change ropes. A bell that was too talkative finds a buyer who likes talk. A quiet bell rides home with someone who prefers the caravan soft to him. A repaired mashk receives water and proves its virtue. No bead where a bead would mean waste. A child counts the dates that remain and the coins that don't. Both sets of numbers will be stories tonight. By late light. The market begins to fold itself backward. Politeness peaks here. Borrowed shade is thanked. The ground is brushed of a stall's memory. Ashes buried shallow so dawn may pass without complaint. Friends who became richer in news than in goods promise the reverse next time. Straps are retied, but lower, in deference to the returning miles. A last cup of tea tastes of cinnamon, which is to say promise. The first stars in the pale sky look like pins drawing the edges of the day together. When the circle is gone, the place looks like any other dip between dunes. Only the faint sweetness of cardamom, the memory of a bell's last word. And the way the sand has been smoothed where feet were thickest will tell tomorrow's traveller that a city bloomed here for 5 hours and left no wound. And yet the market travels intact, in the taste of a new spice touching an old stew, in the feel of a rope that hums in a kinder voice, in the story a child tells about a glass of mountain ice, in the knowledge that promises were made in shade and will be kept in sun. For people who live by motion, markets prove that rest can move too. A circle can be carried in minds and reopened where roots meet again. Commerce becomes a way to praise the day, to thank the craft that kept a pot from fussing, the animal that kept distance honest, the water that kept speech reasonable, the wind that agreed to behave. And under that praise lies the design we've seen in every segment. Make your world so the land can help you. The market does this by honouring corridors for air and space for eyes and manners for mouths. When the last rope lifts, nothing good has been used up. It has only changed hands. In the desert, time ripens people the way sun ripens dates, slowly, thoroughly, without hurry for an audience. Elders do not stand apart from the camp like statues. They sit within it like wells, near enough to touch, deep enough to change a day. Their voices are not loud. The wind is loud enough for everyone. Their gift is calibration, of tempers, of roots, of rope tension and kettle time, of which memory fits which moment so that the whole caravan moves a finger width closer to ease. Morning finds them early, when the dunes still remember night. An elder tests the air with a hand that has measured more breezes than most people will see days. The gesture looks casual, but it reads paragraphs, cool from the north, so lift the flap only this much. A little iron on the tongue suggests dust from salt flats, so wrap scarves before the children ask. They don't announce these decisions with speeches. They move a peg, and someone watching learns a lesson without a lecture. They tip a kettle a moment sooner, and tea refuses to boil bitter. Leadership is many such inches, accumulated until a day adds up to kindness. They are archivists of paths that no longer exist and of springs that wake only for certain moons. Ask an elder for directions and you will not get a line. You will get a story. Walk until the dune looks like a shoulder resting after laughter. When you find the acacia that points like a thin finger toward a tale it has told too many times, you are close. There, if the wind has behaved, the ground will sound hollow under the staff. Avoid the crust and skirt left to a gravel tongue that remembers a river. Then drink, but drink politely. To the hurried, such directions are poetry. To the wise, they are maps that cannot be erased by the first strong wind. Disputes do visit a camp. The desert tolerates frankness. When they do, elders smooth the ground before they smooth the voices. They move the conversation into shade, seat the proud where wind will cool them first, and hand water before handing words. The complaint is a kettle. It must be aired to steam, then moved from the hottest part of the fire. An elder knows the weight of a pause. Let the wind finish its sentence, they say, and in that breath a hot word usually cools to a usable one. Judgment is seldom a verdict. More often it is an arrangement of duties, of time, of restitution measured in tea and labour. People leave not triumphant, but intact. Work is the elder's grammar. They teach by doing the parts of the day that make metaphors unnecessary. You will see a grandmother mend a seam at the ridge where cloth whispers instead of shouts. The needle's path becomes the sentence. Hold, breathe, share the strain. You will see an old herdsman walking not with the swagger of his youth, but with a cartographer's attention, reading tracks, adjusting for a kid's shorter legs, choosing a path that spends less of the herd's patience. No one is shamed into imitation. The imitation arrives because the work is beautiful in the way that honest things are. They keep the camp's dictionary of proportion. An elder will look at a pot and decide the day's salt with a pinch that remembers 100 meals. They will tie a knot at a height that turns rope into instrument instead of whip. High for wind, low for weight, they murmur, and a child hears both instruction and lullaby. They know the difference between urgency and drama. Urgency is a peg driven now. Drama is the voice raised while the peg waits. The first keeps tents standing. The second makes noon hotter. Proverbs gather around them like shade around palms. Boil the tea, not the guest. Leave a place so the wind can brag about your manners. Water tells the truth, but you must ask kindly. These are not decorations. They are tools. An elder fits the right proverb to the right crack in a day the way a craftsman fits a sliver of wood into a wobbling leg. The wobbles stop. Children repeat the lines as games and grow into them as bones. Years later, tying a new tent in new sand, the short sentences return with the accuracy of muscle memory. Memory is also their mercy. They remember your clumsy years without replaying them. They recall the time you set the kettle angrily and made the tea into a scold, and they laugh, gentle as palm shade, and move your hand of breath from a flame. They remember who lost a lamb and who owned the dog that found it, and when the two families quarrel about a patch of grazing, they slip that old story between the new sentences until the quarrel sits down. In markets, they steer you not to the stall with loud coins, but to the stall where a pot rings true when tapped, where a rope hums in the key of sense. Their theology is practical. Gratitude first, dramatics last. If you are thirsty, drink. Then ask who brought the water. Then ask who taught them where to dig. Then thank God for making stone hold a memory of rain long enough for you to be born. If a storm arrives, the elder's prayer is in their hands, the flap lowered in time. The children counted by touch, the animals I met with a word that says, "We have done this before and will do it again." Faith becomes a habit of readiness rather than a posture before trouble. When calm returns, their thanks is as modest as their warning was firm. They are, too, keepers of celebrations, editors of joy. A wedding under their gaze is not the riot of a city street. It is a day tuned so the bride's foot does not tire and the groom's pride does not trip. They slow the drummer's hand a shade so elders' hearts will not race, and they stretch the tea's sweetness through the afternoon so children's laughter will last to evening. They remember the songs that praise without boasting and the jokes that sit everyone on the same mat. Feasts leave little waste. The best compliment to a celebration is a market tomorrow where people still have coin and patience. Elders know how to talk to animals without wasting words. A camel's sideways glance is a sentence. They answer with a hand on the neck and a shift of straps. A dog's bark at the horizon is a footnote. Yes, we see. Thank you. Stay. They do not pretend magic. They practice attention. And animals, relieved to be understood, return attention with steadiness. In that mutual regard, children learn the camp's central ethic without a single maxim. See what is in front of you. Don't hurry the thing that doesn't want to be hurried. Ask the land to help you before you argue with it. They train the young to hold memory without turning it into burden. A map is taught as a song, not as a list. A knot is taught as a dance, not as a scold. Your hands will remember, an elder says, and then ensures the hands have enough honest work to prove the prophecy. When a mistake comes, and mistakes are part of the grammar, the correction is proportionate. Tie it again. This time, listen to the rope. The rope will, in fact, tell the truth to anyone who isn't shouting over IT dusk. Their voices gain a second light. They sit where the wind is kind and let talk find its better temperature. Stories lengthen into the soft instruments of forgiveness. A grandson confesses a thought he regretted speaking aloud at noon. The elder answers with a tale whose lesson is so lightly placed that the boy claims it as his own. A granddaughter asks why the stars begin their evening in different places as seasons turn. The elder stands, draws constellations with the tip of a staff, and weaves navigation into wonder. The camp watches without staring. The evening becomes a classroom designed by sky. What do elders do with grief? They carry it like water in a goatskin, close, plain, not displayed, offered when someone else's thirst appears without warning. They do not hide tears as if tears were a failure of weather. They let them stand as proof of connection. Then they work, mend, tie, pack, pour, because in the desert, Love must translate into labor or it evaporates. Their comfort is calibrated, not theatrical. A palm shade, not a wall shadow. When they sleep near thresholds, tent doors, the first peg on the windward side, the corner where children's dreams sometimes gather and fret. If night rises with a strange voice, they are first to stand. If dawn blushes early with a promise of heat, they are first to tilt the world to meet it. Their rest looks like vigilance because what they guard is not only bodies. It is the day's rhythm. A broken rhythm makes even easy weather exhausting. A kept rhythm makes even stern weather negotiable. In time, the camp becomes a book with their handwriting in the margins. Here, a peg sits deeper because an elder once said here. There, a path departs a hand to the left because an elder remembered a flood that no one else was alive to see. The kettle that sings truest belongs to hands that learned its voice decades ago. The 10 hums in the key of their patience. And the children, pretending boredom, arrange their games at a distance that lets their ears receive without admitting they are listening. When an elder dies, the desert does not grow quieter. It grows more articulate. The words they said continue as habits. The kettle tilts the way theirs tilted. The rope sings the note they preferred. The caravan rests at the hour their hand once suggested to the wind. Grief sits with the camp, a guest who is not hurried away. Stories are poured like tea and sweetened exactly enough. By the time the moon has moved 1 palm's breadth across the sky, you can feel the camp choosing, without anyone saying so, to be more like the one it lost, steadier, kinder, more exact with its gratitude. Dawn lifts the desert the way a careful hand lifts a veil, not all at once, not with flourish, but with reverence for what lies beneath. Before the first light, the world is a bowl of cool and hush. Tents are ideas more than objects. Ropes are dark lines drawn with a patient brush. Camels breathe like tide at a shore nobody has mapped. And the small domestic sounds, an ember rearranged with a twig, a pot nudged to remember its duty, a quiet cough tucked into a sleeve, arrive as punctuation in a sentence that has not yet chosen its nouns. The first color is not gold. It is a widowed blue, thin, dignified, almost reluctant. It rinses the eastern rim and pours down the dunes in seams that make the sand look freshly combed. Footprints carved into yesterday's ledger reappear in a gentler script, crisp at their edges when night has hardened them, softened within where cool has consoled them. A fox's calligraphy turns from ink to graphite. A child's small heel mark looks like a moon phase captured mid-thought. The camp stirs as if spoken to by name. Someone wakes the kettle with a hand that remembers last night's flame. The first pour of water sounds extravagant in the silence, and then modest again as the pot accepts it, whispering its promise back through tin and iron. Tea, like dawn, prefers steady beginnings. An elder tests the air with a palm, a gesture that is half prayer, half weather report, and nods toward the tent edge that will soon lift to become morning's door. A dog stands, shakes the night out of its ribs, and steps into the pail with a confidence only an animal can wear at this hour, the confidence of belonging to both darkness and light. From the animals, dawn reads as appetite and order. Camels fold themselves from their night's geometry, knuckling up with slow grace until the silhouettes lengthen and acquire minds. Their eyes, which at night were wells, become mirrors, reflecting the new line the horizon has drawn. A calf noses at its mother's flank with a tiny percussion that sounds like a modest drummer joining a rehearsal. Goats, whose sleep is an arrangement of triangles, blur those edges into motion. A group inhale. A first argumentative bleat, a reconsideration. And then the grazing stroll that revises yesterday's plan by a handful of paces. Even the mashk, the goatskin that held the camp's private river through the dark, beads again. Small pearls of cool gathering like an answer to a gentle question. Dawn is inventory. Not the impatient counting of a market clerk, but a softer litany of readiness. Pegs, seated, with their heads showing just enough to be courteous. Lines, humming in the key of morning, slack where slack is kindness, firm where firm is foresight. Cloth, breathing. No seam sulking. One corner making that little tick which asks for a friend stitch before wind forgets to be polite. Water, sufficient for tea and prayer, then for animals, then for the long day's mouth. Fire, remembered, not reborn. Embers arranged into a shallow hill so heat walks into breakfast without waking the heat of noon. And then there is the sky, learning its own grammar again. The blue draws breath and, on that breath, a pale saffron arrives. Dunes accept the warm as if it were a guest whose name is known but whose stories one never tires of hearing. Shadows lengthen in reverse, reaching west before the sun has formally introduced itself. The wind, if it has planned any argument for later, keeps the plan to itself a while longer. In this pause, the camp decides its day, move or mend, long stride or market amble, story work at the loom or track reading beyond the ridge. The decision is not a meeting. It is a gradual consensus reached in the way hands set themselves to tasks that harmonize. Breakfast is the audible end of night. Flatbread sighs into shape on a convex pan. The first crackle is a kind of applause for the dough's good behavior. Tea's lid rattles, but a finger finds the right angle and lifts it into quiet again. Dates go around like small brown moons. A pinch of salt drops on yogurt and becomes stars on a cool firmament. Children, still more dream than day, are fed with the tenderness of habit. A corner of bread dipped, an extra sip, a thumb to a cheek where night's grit has written a dot. No one speaks loudly. Not because loudness is banned, but because it would be tactless. To the animals, to the fire. To the thin-edged light still negotiating with darkness, dawn is the hour when elders spend the least words and accomplish the most edits. One steps outside the ring of tents and listens to the dune. The sand answers in low syllables. Firm here, velvet there, a small new scarp on the lee that will ask for a different angle if the caravan climbs it. Another elder considers the sky's milk, thin haze high, a ring so faint around the sun that only old eyes see it. Later, wind. The eyes decide, and the hands tie as if they believe what the eyes have said. A third elder counts, not heads or hooves, but conditions. This child slept too hot. That dog dreams restlessly. That kettle wants a new seal. Dawn is compassionate triage. There are small ceremonies hidden in the hour. A girl walks to the guy line she learned to respect last summer and plucks it, grinning when it gives the same note as yesterday. A boy, taller now, tries on a new job by lifting a saddle with the care he has seen his father use. Low, balanced, never loud. A mother straightens a rug so its pattern faces east just enough to make breakfast feel aligned. A father tips the water bag and hears, from the way the stream thickens, that the skin will need oil before noon. None of this is spoken of as ritual, but if you watch it without needing to name it, it looks like a prayer answered by action. Migrating birds sometimes choose dawn as a road. They cross in angled script, writing a message the land reads even if people do not. The camels follow the line with their eyes, heads tilting as if adjusting the sky's saddle. Children count with breath, not numbers, one inhale per bird, and arrive at totals that are obviously wrong and yet satisfyingly exact for this morning only. The elders call out nothing. The birds are not theatre, they are weather. But later, a proverb will have acquired a feather's weight. Even those who fly keep a formation. If the day is a travel day, dawn is the scarce abundance when miles are cheapest. Loads are lifted with dignity. Ropes sing their first clean chords. The bell camel's bronze throat clears with a single, rounded word, now. Steps start in a register that makes conversation optional. Words, when they come, are easy agreements, left of the shoulder. Sip at the next ripple. 2 sips for the child. The line lays itself onto the land like a measured brushstroke. In this light, distance is a friend introduced by a friend, if it is a camp day. Dawn edits work into sequences that will not cost more than they pay. Looms lean into the shade that will stay shade even when the sun grows authoritative. Repairs that want cool fingers line up for early attention. A seam's second chance, a strap's third hole, a peg's new home. Animals are brushed where their winter fur gives up a last handful like a soft cloud, and the brush whisper is a small hymn to reciprocity. Children are assigned errands phrased as trusts. Only you can carry this. Only you know the good angle of that flap, and they rise into usefulness like bread into heat. The desert at dawn is also a lesson in forgiveness. Harshness is not erased. but it is postponed. The day will ask for patience, and patience is easier to find when a body has known, even for 1 hour, that the world can be gentle. The dunes, which at noon will insist on mathematics of slope and step and sip, now behave like furniture in a familiar room, edges a person can navigate without looking down. Even the market's memory, if yesterday was noise, fades into something like gratitude, spices remembered as color, coins as watercolored circles in a shallow bowl, a friend's laugh as a low ember that did not burn the hand. There is a sound that belongs to dawn and to no other hour, the first true hum of the tent. At midnight, ropes dream in a single tone. At dawn, they find harmony, 2 or 3 notes braided by a changing breeze that has not yet chosen to be stern. It is the key of possibility. Tea tastes different under this chord. Stories begun last night accept their endings. Plans consent to be reasonable. You might mistake this for mere prettiness, but if the tent were a teacher, this would be its most effective lesson. Tune early, and the day will sing in your register. The sun's disk, when it finally climbs clean of the horizon, is smaller than memory makes it. It appears like a coin paid into a jar already ringing with thanks. Shadows snap from long to legible. Faces, until now canvas washed, acquire features. Pride, prudence, playfulness, each makes its claim on different brows. A prayer is spoken, or not, depending on custom, but in every case something like prayer is enacted. Bodies face east for a breath, a line, and begin. Kettles are set aside. Embers are spread thin so they do not sulk. Rugs are shaken and rolled. Or, if today is a day to stay, a lamp is snuffed and the loom shuttle receives its first nudge, and then dawn, as an hour, is over, but not gone. It travels forward in habits, in the way a rope is retied without anger at noon, in the way a child offers water to a cousin before the cousin asks, in the way a quarrel is deferred to a cooler syllable. The memory of the blue, the saffron, the first good sip puts discipline within reach when heat comes with its old arguments. Dawn gives the day a margin wide enough for kindness to be legible. There is a line in the desert that is not a line at all, a boundary that keeps receding like a polite host who will not let you be the last to leave. The horizon is the desert's oldest sentence, always beginning, never finished, and the Bedouin read it with a literacy made of breath and patience. To the restless, it taunts. To the practiced, it steadies. It is not a promise of elsewhere, but a way of making here large enough to hold tomorrow. Stand with me where morning has just unrolled its pale ribbon across the dunes. The horizon is thin as thread, yet it binds sky to sand with a seam that has never popped. You would think such a distance would be empty of detail, but even from here, the eye feels texture. Light finds the low backs of dunes and paints them with a brush too soft for cities. Silver first, then gold, then the color of warm bread. Between those backs lie passages you cannot see yet. The horizon carries them invisibly, like a map folded inside a map. The Bedouin do not stare at it for answers. They nod to it for scale. It reminds the body not to hurry its own story. To noon the horizon hardens. Heat lifts it as if it were a mirage of itself, a second line hovering above the first. This is when an inexperienced heart begins to doubt. The dune you meant to reach seems to walk away as you walk toward it. The air puts knives in the distance. But the caravan does not debate with geometry. It changes key. Steps shorten, shade is rearranged upon the moving bodies, speech is edited to a ledger of essentials, sips a time to shadow. The bell camel's note grows rounder, less bright. The horizon, hearing itself chased politely rather than demanded rudely, relaxes. It is a lesson repeated until it becomes reflex. Pursue with poise, not with insistence. By late day the horizon is merciful again. The line softens, as if forgiving everyone for forgetting what it meant at noon. Dunes that were glare become sculpture. The far-off palms keep their green secret but no longer hide it with pride. You understand that mercy can be modest. A child riding in the howdah lifts a hand and places a fingertip over a ridge to make it vanish, then removes the finger and returns the ridge to the world, astonished at the power of a small gesture. An elder sees the same ridge and remembers a year when water pooled beyond it. The memory sharpens the present without stealing from it. The horizon is a book with margins wide enough for both of these annotations. Tonight the horizon is not a line but an edge lit with pins. The Milky Way pours beyond it like a road only birds and old stories can take. The camp circles of light, lamps, embers, eyes, settle into a constellation of their own, and the far rim becomes less about distance than about belonging. The Bedouin do not ask the horizon to be near at night. They ask the sky to be honest, and it is. Polaris says here, Orion says season, the Pleiades say tenderness, and the horizon says nothing at all, which is how you know it is true. Silence is a trustworthy language in the desert. The eternal horizon is a teacher of proportion. It makes triumphs temperate. What is a single ridge crossed in the face of so much patience? And losses bearable. What is a day's mistake against a book this long? To live with it is to trade drama for stamina. Children learn this without being told. A game of racing to the crest becomes a choreography of breath and sand sense. A sulk about a dropped task becomes a walk to the edge of camp where the viewer raises the sulk's sharpness and replaces it with a curiosity. Which curve will the sand choose next? The elders, when they correct, point outward with open hands, not inward with pointed fingers. Look, they say. The look cures more quickly than a lecture. Roots braided across years tie people to that rim. The Bedouin do not compile a single road. They keep a repertoire, a set of songs for the feet to sing. The horizon keeps them all. There was the winter path that rode the hard crust and made distance cheap. There was the linear path that rehearsed patience between stingy wells. There was the festive path that turned a caravan into a low river of tassels and bells. A young guide inherits these not as lines to memorize but as relations to keep. This ridge is generous in north wind. That wadi lies. This salt flat is honest if you test it with the staff. That oasis wears its welcome with dignity. The horizon is the ledger where such kinships are reconciled. Horizon also means restraint. A pot that boils too hard makes the day small. A voice that rises too fast makes companions far. The long line teaches the short habit. Lower the flame. Soften the tone. In the tent you can see it in the way hands tilt a flap, half a hand, not a whole arm, asking the world to meet you in the middle rather than to come all the way to your impatience. You hear it in the 3 cups of tea, each a measured approach to sweetness. You feel it in a knot that holds because it has been tightened to cooperation, not to war. The horizon is the polite refusal of extremes. There is grief on that line too, of course. People have traveled toward it and not returned. Animals have laid their last breath against its brightness. The desert does not pledge safety. It pledges clarity. When sorrow comes, the camp faces the rim together and speaks a prayer that is more inventory than argument. We were given shade. We were given water. We were given wind that remembered to be kind more often than not. We were given this person, whose footsteps are now part of the text we read at dawn. Then the work resumes. Not to forget, but to keep company with a memory in the only way the land respects, by arranging life so that others may be held. Markets and wells and songs travel under that rim like beads traveling a string. Each bead is particular, common, rope, a new proverb acquired with a smile, but the string is what keeps them from scattering. The horizon is that string. It reconciles towns and tents, the fixed and the moving, the day that asks for ledgers and the night that asks for lullabies. It tells the tribe that they are not small because the world is large. They are precise because the world is large. Precision is how you honor immensities. Sometimes the horizon pretends to disappear. A dust storm makes a brown curtain where the line should be. Clouds walk low and confident, writing their own ground. The camp folds into itself and waits. Inside the tent, where the cloth hums and the kettle narrates, the horizon is still present, in rope, in breath, in the measured space between stories and sleep. When the curtain lifts, the line returns with its old shyness, and the camp nods a greeting without complaint about the interruption. Patience has not been wasted. It has been stored. Children ask the best horizon questions. Does it end? What color is it when you get there? Can you carry some home? Elders answer in ways that let wonder keep its clothes. It ends where you decide to rest. It is the color of your breath that day. You already do. A boy hears this and, the next morning, walks with his mother beside the bell camel in a stride half a hand slower than yesterday. He has understood something, that bringing a piece of the horizon home looks like arranging your pace so that others can walk with you. A girl hears it and retires a flap at a kinder angle. She has carried a sliver of distance into shade. The eternal horizon is not only outside. It is within. There is a long line in each person that asks to be respected, an attention span that lengthens with good tea and unhurried talk, a patience that grows when wind is read and not argued with, a capacity for quiet that expands when shade is crafted thoughtfully. The Bedouin cultivate these internal horizons as deliberately as they pack their tents. They arrive at markets with minds that do not end at the noise. They arrive at disputes with tempers that do not end at the first sharp word. They leave a place better not through grand gesture but by lengthening the margin in which kindness can operate. Look again, last time, at that far seam. It will be there tomorrow, and it will not be the same. The dune will have learned a new curl. The light will choose a new paragraph. Your feet will lay down different sentences. Yet the conversation will remain faithful. You walk. It recedes. You adjust. It approves. To call it eternal is not to claim it never changes. It is to admit that it changes in a way that lets you change with it. That is the desert's gentlest miracle, when the fire is low and the tent has tuned itself to night's key. Someone always steps out for one more breath. They look toward the rim, which is now only an idea stitched by stars, and they exhale the day. If it was a hard day, the horizon takes the heat from the breath, spreads it thin, and returns only sleep. If it was an easy day, it accepts thanks without the embarrassment of witness. Either way, the exchange is clean. Tomorrow, there will be shade to arrange, water to honor, wind to translate, a bell to set moving, and children to lift the flap with, and the horizon to keep all of it true-sized, the desert's quiet thesis. Whispered across these segments is simple. Align with what is larger than you in ways that make you larger for others. The horizon is the diagram of that thought. Its long, calm line draws a way to live, steady, proportionate, listening, generous at the pace of breath. Follow it, and distances cease to be threats. They become rooms you know how to furnish. Forget it, and even short walks become arguments. The Bedouin choose the first, again and again. The line approves by existing. Thanks for traveling into the desert's quiet. Tonight we learn the Bedouin arts of shade, water, and wind, the gentle science of living with the land. If this brought you calm, breathe once more with the dunes, and let sleep arrive like a cool breeze under palm shade. For more slow history, subscribe and save this to your sleep playlist. Good night.